What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Unlockables podcast, the story of video games, the people who play them, and the memories made along the way. As always, I am your host. My name is Eric, and I'd like to thank you so much for tuning in wherever, whenever, in time and space you may be located, or perhaps you're located in the far, far grimdark future of the 41st millennium. That is right. If you read the title of this episode, we are going to be talking about Space Marine 2 today, the hit action shooter that just came out a couple of months ago and absolutely went viral on social media and got me to waste more of my money playing something that I probably didn't have time to play, but goddamn, I enjoyed it anyways, maybe just to spoil some of my thoughts a little bit later in the episode. But to do this game justice, to do something on the scale of Warhammer justice, I didn't want to review this game on my own and do a solo episode, so I had to call in two of my best podcasting buddies, two of the best guys I know on the internet, my fellow squad mates in my Space Marine unit, and we are going to do this episode and give all the glory to the Emperor of Mankind. I have with me in the studio today my good friends Will and Nick from Friday Night Gamecast. Gentlemen, how are you doing today? Is a glorious day under the Emperor's protection.
Brother, the Emperor has blessed us this day, coming on to do this podcast with you. It's fantastic. So excited.
May the Emperor preserve us, Eric. It's so exciting to come back on and talk about this with you. Last time you joined us on our show for a little bit of Helldivers action, and that was so much fun. And I'm incredibly excited about this game and excited to jump in here with you.
I forgot I jumped on for Helldivers, no pun intended. That's correct. I was thinking earlier, I was like, yeah, I know what? I came on one of Nick's fireside chats for Destiny, and I remember coming on for I think I came on for Final Fantasy 16, if I remember, but I totally forgot that Helldivers 2 was a game that came out this year. Wow, what an absolutely stacked year we've had so far. But it's always an honor to have you guys on. I knew when I was coming out with this season, I needed to get you guys back on my show, and when I saw you guys posting about Space Marine 2, I was like, well, looks like I'm getting this game and it's going to be an episode. So thank you guys both for being here with me today. Before we dive into the good stuff, I just, we like to break the ice and just kind of talk about what we've been playing. So I'll toss it over to either of you guys, whoever wants to start. Have you been playing anything good lately?
Will, do you want to take it first?
I sure will. So I have been waiting because as far as our episodes that we've been doing recently, we've been doing a lot of reviews, which doesn't give us a whole lot of space to talk about what I've been playing. So I've been playing a lot. Let me break it down. First off, Astrobot is one of the best games I've played in my entire life. I tried to say generational.
It's a generational.
But I'm going to say in my entire life. That game is so awesome. We had a big old review about that and had a blast with Jacob McCourt. So definitely go check that out. And if you haven't played the game, you need to go buy a PS5 and play it. This is your sign. Look, if you're hearing my voice, go spend the $800. Go buy a PS5 Pro. Go whatever. Give Sony more money and do it. Go ahead and buy Astrobot because it's definitely worth it. Astrobot is incredible. Obviously, we've been playing some good Space Marine this whole time, which, as you already mentioned, the year's stacked. Like, this is a crazy year for games. I would love to talk about a demo that I've played recently.
Oh, yes. Let's do it.
Look, Nicholas is very excited about this because it's very out of character for me. But I played the Metaphor Refantasio demo.
Ooh.
And I have seen the light, all right? I'm going to have to hop in my JRPG turn-based anime, bag and just hop in and start playing this game because the graphics are so fun and like colorful, watercolor-ish. The art presentation is next level. Like, the game's not even out yet, and I'm already like, if this doesn't win best like art direction or game direction and the Game Awards, I'm going to be shocked. Like, I'll be upset, legitimately. Beautiful, gorgeous game. Even the menu screens, you're going through the menu screens, and I'm sure anybody who played Persona is probably just like, well, duh. But no, you go through the menu screens and I'm just like, this is so cool and fresh and artistic and interesting. Like, all the characters kind of like side by side, and the little like jut outs of when you're just picking something as simple as putting a breastplate on my character. I'm just like, why does this look so fancy with the menu screen? I'm like, this is top tier. Like, it just oozes quality. And that's literally just me playing the demo. So I played through it. I'm just about done, which is already a super long demo. It's like 40 plus minutes, almost like an hour of gameplay. And I'm just like,
that's the prologue.
I'm just gonna have to spend more money already. I'm looking forward to playing Dragon Ball, but now I'm just like, no, I got to spend more money on Metaphor that I don't have.
Yeah, as of this recording, we're right on the cusp of Metaphor releasing. I think it's in a couple of days here. I know today review scores just came out and it's looking fantastic. And I was hoping that I'd get a little bit of break from the barrage of new games coming out.
Impossible.
But as soon as I saw that and how stylish that game looks, and just having become a Persona fan this year, I played Persona 5 for the first time, and that game was incredible. I saw Metaphor like everybody else, and I was just like, I think I'm gonna have to just maybe find $60 or $70 on my couch cushion if I can I can swing it somehow. So, and to all you out there listening, that's a sign to buy this game. It should be on the back of the box because notorious not JRPG guy Will is gonna buy this game.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And play the game. So that's better than any review score you could possibly get for any game.
Do you know how much shit this man gave me for playing Persona 3 Reloaded? I was inconsolable in March of this year. And then and not only that, I had to put off Yakuza Infinite Wealth because we were doing so much earlier on, and then Final Fantasy VII Rebirth came through. But yeah, if this I was flabbergasted when Will gave me the endorsement there. But
Amazing.
yeah, no, it's incredible.
That's awesome. It was through almost gritted teeth. I was like, Nick, this game is gas.
I can't admit it to him.
I can't let the homies know that I love Metaphor.
I can't let them know.
but yeah, those are my big ones right now. And then we talked a little bit earlier as far as like kind of spooky month, but for October, for my little spooktacular, I should say, I booted up Resident Evil Village. So this is my first time playing through. Very, very fun so far. Everyone said it's quality. I'm right in there inclined to believe it because I played through 7 and I really enjoyed it. And I just got through with House Dimitrescu. So, no more Lady D chasing me around the castle. So, we'll see if it holds up.
Mommy.
That's what I'm saying. I was like, we're done with the Dami Mommy already. So I'm like, all right, well, let's see what the rest of this game has. Werewolves. Okay. I guess.
Not nearly as good. That's cool. I'm looking forward to getting to that one as well. I again, the year first for me, I recently played the first Resident Evil, my first experience with the franchise this year, and I've bought quite a few of them on the sales now, so I'm going to be playing through the entire series. Hopefully when I have free time, but we'll
when Guiding Keys is over, we got to start the RE. Yes, the Resident Evil version of Guiding Keys.
Yeah, that's
chasing raccoons.
Yeah, that's chasing raccoons. Yeah, that's the second mention. Somebody was like, "Oh, this could be your next series." So that's one, and then somebody mentioned I could do like a Sonic story series. I'm just like, I don't know.
The Sonic lore is too deep, and that's a community you don't want to interface with. I promise you.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I've played my fair share of Sonic games this year, but I don't know if I'm ready to dive in at that level quite yet. Yeah. But Will, that's awesome. Anything else you've been playing, or is that about it?
No, that's really everything right now.
All right, Nick, what about you? What have you been up to?
Yeah, so definitely same as Will. I've been playing the game of the show quite extensively as much as I can. And we obviously did the review for Astrobot, so I played the absolute heck out of Astrobot, platinumed it, put a lot more time into it than I thought I did. But I'll reassert that I'm pretty sure I left the controller sitting for a while, so I don't know how accurate the Sony played time is technically. But other than that, for starting off, same thing as what Will was saying for Spooky Month. This is a game that we reviewed on. This is one of the first games that we ever reviewed for the Friday Night Gamecast. And so we recently did a collab with a good friend of the show, Dave Jackson. So as of the date that this episode will come out, his episode will also be out. We reviewed Control from Remedy on his show. And obviously when we reviewed it, I had seen it. I had touched a little bit of some of the expansions, but I never finished them. And they both recommended that I go in and finish them. So for Spooky Month, I started off by trying to just finish the campaigns for obviously the Foundation DLC as well as the Alan Wake expansion, or the AWE DLC, which kind of dovetails perfectly into Alan Wake 2. So yeah, I have Alan Wake 2 loaded up it's on my PS5. It's not on my hard drive yet, but I have a lot of grandiose plans of what I'm going to play. The only like other thing that's like of note that I have also like continued to play, and in very close to the finish line on, and I have a lot of like complex thoughts on, is Star Wars Outlaws.
Ooh,
yeah, really, really interesting game. Definitely, if anybody knows anything about Ubisoft, I'll be the first to let you know that this is not a game that's going to break the mold from what people would know to expect from Ubisoft, right? This is not going to be the game that's going to change your expectations or be like, oh my God, they figured it out. They definitely didn't in a lot of cases, but as you know, obviously the party representative for the Star Wars sycophants on the Friday Night Gamecast, I'm definitely one to say that this game captures the Star Wars experience really, really well, from the audio, obviously the score, the audio design, just in the worlds, like the amount of exploration in those worlds. I played this game with the intention of just golden pathing the game, and I think that like every single time I tried to do that, I got distracted by a sabacc parlor. I got distracted by a food stand where I could play a QTE minigame of eating with your little buddy Nix. And it's like some of the cutest stuff. Like, and then there are even like hidden secrets that are in there that just like, they did a really interestingly good job of kind of like tying in ways for you to explore a lot of the cities and a lot of the more well fleshed out areas. Outside of that, there's a lot of like rough edges. Third person shooting is awful. The like level design leaves a lot to be desired. Her actual physical rig doesn't like interface with a lot of the environments or the geography outside of the Golden Path very well at all. Like you can't like easily scale, like you can't mantle on ledges that easily. Like you have to try 2 or 3 times to get the game to actually like fix it. I floated off into space after like jumping on a speeder multiple times. Like there's so much jank in this game. And I'm like, did they just do like one QA pass on this game and then just press go, just greenlight it, which is, I feel like typical for Ubisoft. But no, I mean, here's what I'll say is that like if you're the will of the gaming community that's going to be like, if it says Ubisoft on the front of it, I'm not going to play it until it's $1. You're absolutely justified to do so. But if you're a Star Wars fan and you enjoy the Star Wars universe and anything about that universe really calls to you, and you want something that's a little bit different, a little bit off kilter from the Jedi experience that we got from Respawn and the Jedi Fallen, Order Survivor series, give this game a try. This is definitely a solid one to check out. But other than that, I have a lot of stuff loaded up that I want to get to for October. Obviously, Alien Isolation. I want to do the same thing Will is, because RE8 is, I think, RE6 and RE8 are the only games that I haven't played so far. Okay. I'm really, really excited to jump in there and play a little bit of that. So that's so fun. That's what I got.
For sure. I haven't heard too much about Star Wars Outlaws and stuff that's going on with that. The business side of me is plugged into like the stock market and stuff, and I do know that their Ubisoft stock price just hit like an all-time low.
Did you hear about Tencent trying to buy them out?
No, I have not.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It was a recent splash on Twitter. It probably swept through pretty quickly, but they were saying that the Guimond family was entertaining talks of a buyout from Tencent, and Tencent already has like a partial ownership share. They're like 10% of Ubisoft right now, and so they were talking about completely just taking the whole company. And I'm like, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Every time I hear about Tencent acquiring really any major large corporation acquiring companies like this, I'm like, oh, this doesn't sound great.
Yeah. My gut response when you said that was I was not pleasantly surprised. I was more like, oh no, surprised. That can't be good. I know Tencent has a pretty major share, owns most of Riot, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly already. So Tencent making moves in the industry, that's interesting. I wanted to ask you guys both, since you both brought it up here, I wanted to circle back to Astrobot really quick. It's not something I have played yet, but it's something I want to, because I'm just a sucker for really, really great platformers, and everything that I've heard about it leads me to believe that it's a great platformer, and I need to pick it up. I just need the time to be able to do that. I initially reacted to Astrobot with a little bit of hostility, because there were like 4 or 5 articles, and I've talked to Matt from Fun and Games Podcast about this when we did an episode together a couple weeks ago. There were a bunch of articles that came out that were like, oh, Sony like beats Nintendo at their own game with like Mario, and I'm just like, all right, I'm like, I respect what you're trying to go for here, but like, let's not just discount like the last 40 years of Mario's legacy just because like Astrobot's really good. So I wanted to ask you guys' opinion because I'm a Nintendo Mario fanboy till the day I die. Do you think the comparisons to Mario are deserved and warranted?
It's funny. This is almost verbatim like a conversation that we had during the episode. So I mean, we can really just kind of like pull directly from that by. I would kind of agree with you what you're saying with that initial like hint of hostility. I don't think it's unwarranted because once again, Astrobot, incredible. I love that game so much.
Right.
I'm not putting Astrobot over, Super Mario World or, like even Odyssey, which I played recently, and like I loved Odyssey. And like they're just when you compare the two games, Odyssey and Astrobot may be very, very similar as far as overall quality and like strength of platforming, but Mario has so much extra on top. There's different power-ups and different things that you're going for. There's nostalgia does a lot of heavy lifting for Astrobot, which is not a bad thing because it's awesome looking at all like the history, the last 30 years of PlayStation. But I think some of the people, especially in those articles that you mentioned, they're probably looking at that with a little bit too heavy of rose-colored glasses versus being like, all right, let's not act like this is the best platformer of the last, 40 years, 50 years. Is it one of? I would say yes, for sure.
Okay. That makes sense.
But yeah, no, it's not blowing Mario. It's not beating Nintendo at their own game. If anything, I'm like, hey, if you have a PlayStation and you don't have a Switch, here's the closest thing you're going to get to a Mario is going to be Astrobot.
Oh, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I feel like, and Jacob said this too, is that it's not really fair to compare the two of them because Astrobot at its core is an advertisement for PlayStation Studios products, right? Or even a lot of like infamous third-party titles that are tied to PlayStation. So I think that like the essence of, but that notwithstanding, in my opinion, Astrobot stands on its own as just an incredibly delightful, fun, engaging, just joyful experience at its core, right? So like, I think even if it wasn't a vehicle to make people be like, oh, I wonder what robot that is, and then look up the robot or like the name of the franchise that they're from, and then be like, oh, this is interesting. Kind of like the way that Super Smash Bros. Did for a lot of like Nintendo IP and people kind of expanding and realizing that. Even if it didn't do that, I still think that this would be, a generational game. I feel like it's so well cared for and so well crafted in a lot of different moments that it's not something that can be easily discounted. And I love Mario. I played Super Mario 64. I grew up on Super Mario 64, played Super Mario Sunshine. I have, grand designs to want to get around to playing Wonder or Odyssey, excuse me. Wonder and Odyssey both. And I think that the difference between those games and Astrobot is that I feel like there's a certain part of Astrobot that I can latch onto because of my knowledge of just the general PlayStation IP and the history and those sorts of things. But I would never say that it's going to be better or anything like that. I feel like when people say that, they do it hyperbolically for engagement, the rage baiting on Twitter for the most part. And I feel like anybody, I think most anybody who has is reasonable takes for the most part can say that, yeah, it's a great game, but it's not going to be something that's going to revolutionary. They didn't reinvent the wheel with this.
For sure. No, when I first heard that, I was just kind of like, whoa, that's quite a bold thing to be claiming. I mean, I've said multiple times on this show, I think any year we have kind of a mainline Mario game come out, it's probably the best designed game of that year just because of how much Nintendo polishes those games before they put them out. So when I started reading a couple of the articles and they're just like, oh, it's stands toe to toe with Mario, I was like, I feel a little bit uncomfortable here. Not that I don't think that it's not outside the realm of possibility for something to be as good or better than Mario. And I would never say something isn't that good if it has achieved that standard just to kind of be a hater. I was just kind of like, whoa, I enjoyed the first Astros Playroom. I thought that was a really great game, but now this one comes out and people are just like, oh, it's on par with what Mario is doing. I was just kind of like, that's quite a bold comparison to be making, but it seems like they're really heading in the right direction with Astrobot, and it seems like it's a really good platformer in its own right. And I think we need more. I think we need more quality platformers other than just Mario, just to have some variety for sure. So, 100%. Yeah, I definitely know that I want to play it for sure. I just need to get around to having time to do that. And I guess I'll talk quickly about the one thing that I'm playing, or two things actually, aside from the game that we're about to talk about in a second here, Space Marine 2. The big one I've been diving into recently is I picked up The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. Ooh. And
So happy to get to talk to you about this.
yeah, that's been it's in the same style as the Link's Awakening remake that they did a couple years ago, and I absolutely love that game. That game's one of my favorite Zelda games. I was a little bit skeptical going in just based on, I wasn't opposed to like playing as Zelda. I'm not like one of the gamer people who was like, oh, I can't play as a woman. Like that's stupid.
You mean you're not Asmongold? What?
There's no cockroaches crawling across me. Is there?
There you go.
I'm also quite a bit heavier than he is. I'd probably break him if I sat on him. So, oh no, he's going to hear this podcast episode and make like a 40-minute video about me. Oh no.
Here we go.
That would be very good for your engagement though.
It would be very, very it would be very good for my engagement. I'd probably have all 1-star reviews, but that's fine.
It's okay.
So yeah, I think we can say that it's a pretty general understood consensus that Legend of Zelda on the Switch has been probably the best it's been in the consistently the best it's been for the 5 titles we've gotten now. Probably in the series history, and we've gotten 2 games in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom that most people would say have kind of redefined Zelda and are considered generational titles, not only on the Switch, but in this era of gaming. And I was curious how they were going to like carry that spirit forward into Echoes of Wisdom, and they did a really good job of that by providing you with, like, obviously the gimmick is you get all these echoes, whether they're monsters or furniture or inanimate objects, and all these things you can do, and you can summon them at any time you want. You have a certain number of charges on your fairy companion. You can summon beds or tables or moblins or Lizalfos or anything that you've previously defeated in the world to help you defeat monsters or solve puzzles. And the world is flush with a lot of puzzles that you can really kind of solve in any kind of creative way based on the echoes that you have. I mean, I'm a simple boy and my brain doesn't process like high level puzzle solving. So my first attempt to solve any puzzles, I just try to stack beds on top of each other and see if that works. Like that's my go-to, just stacking beds on top of each other. And sometimes, most of the time I can get that to work, but there are definitely other ways that you can solve the puzzles and interact with the world to utilize the humongous toolkit that they've given you of all these echoes. So I'm probably about like halfway through. Playing with Zelda is really, really cool. For anybody out there that was worried, like, oh, I don't have like the sword and bow and bomb gameplay of Link, you have an ability that you can go into like a sword mode for a limited set of time to like get through obstacles and stuff. So that option isn't completely taken away from you, but it is limited. And I kind of like that Zelda has kind of her own thing to be able to get through puzzles and bosses and enemies and dungeons. And it's just like a really... Again, Nintendo continues to have unique and fresh takes on Zelda, and it's very clear that they're going to kind of take this Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom mindset, even into future Zeldas, even into like more traditional 2D Zeldas. They're trying to break that mold and interject the creativity that you found in Breath and Tears into the more standard formula. It's not quite to the degree of like building robots with flame-throwing penises that you saw in Tears of the Kingdom, but it's a good first attempt in a 2D Zelda, and I'm really, really enjoying it. So I don't want to spoil too much of what happens because I think it's a great adventure. I would highly recommend picking it up if you guys have some time after Spooky Game Month for sure. So yeah, Zelda's fantastic. I'm loving that. And then the only other thing I can mention, I won't go on a long spiel about it, is I'm playing the first community game of the month, which we'll have an episode on it later this month, which is Final Fantasy Tactics. And man, that game has been kicking my ass.
Oh no.
That's more challenging than I thought it was going to be, but I'm having a really great time kind of figuring out the systems and approaching like each level kind of like a puzzle and figuring out how to get through the various stages and stuff. So I'll have more thoughts on that when I finish it on the episode at the end of the month. But yeah, Final Fantasy Tactics has been pretty awesome so far.
Have you been emulating that, or did you get a PSP to play it on?
I am emulating it.
Okay, got it.
Legally, of course.
Well, of course.
Yeah. I had a PSP a long time ago, but I traded it in. So when the people voted for it, I was like, well, I wanted to play the PS1 version, so I'll just emulate that.
Got it. Okay.
The PS1 version got some wonky like translation stuff with it.
Interesting.
Doesn't quite, from like the Japanese to the English.
Mm-hmm. Is that like the version with the DLC? It's like something like the like Lion's Heart edition or something?
No, I don't. It's just the base game. So,
okay, got it.
I know there's like a patch version that has like the better translation and some fixed stuff. And then I know the PSP one, War of the Lions, has some fixes, some like extra classes, and just some general. I guess that would be considered probably like a remaster. before that term was thrown up around a lot. So I might check that out just to see like comparatively how it stacks with the base game. But yeah, it's pretty much all I've been playing.
That's awesome, man.
You have any questions? Were you going to ask about Zelda, or should we just move on?
The only thing that I was thinking about Zelda, feel free to cut this if you think this is running too long, but I was listening to a couple of reviews on it because I have been obsessed with playing. I want to get into playing some of the 2D Zeldas. Like I want to go back and play A Link to the Past, and I want to go and play like Minish Cap that's on like the NSO, and I obviously played Awakening, and again, like Awakening, similar to what you were saying, is like one of my favorite Zelda games, like of all time. It's like up there. It's like right underneath Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom for me personally. But and so it was interesting because people were talking about it being obviously fascinating that it decided to pivot and go this route and actually give Zelda her own game. But then some folks were a little bit kind of they were frustrated by the fact that Grezzo didn't seem to try to innovate on the combat gameplay at all. They just turned Zelda into like a Link facsimile, and that like it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, you can be Zelda and you have all these cool power abilities, but you don't get to like fight as like a mage or like a warrior priestess or whatever. It's more of just like it's the sword and bow, right? I don't know. Did you feel that way, or is it fine?
I think it's okay. I've honestly just been I rarely go into the sword mode unless I'm kind of using like it for a boss fight or anything like that.
Okay, got it.
I've gone into the mindset of the game is giving me all these echo abilities, so I'm going to try and utilize these echo abilities to like fight enemies, even if it's less optimal. It is a little bit slower because when you call in like the echo enemies that you get to like fight the other enemies, they're kind of stupid, and sometimes you'll just watch them like walk around and throw stuff at each other for like 2 minutes in a room, and you're just like, all right, like. Come on, I could have cleaned this up like in 10 seconds if I had a more optimal way to fight. But it doesn't bother me too much. I think maybe if they do future games like this, maybe they'll find ways to innovate on that a little more.
Gotcha.
I clearly see that their emphasis was getting the ecosystem to kind of work and figuring out how that will work with like puzzle solving and stuff. That's very clearly the heart and core of this game. And I would say too that I even felt that Link's Awakening was a little more difficult in its puzzle presentation. I feel like Echoes is a little bit easier. I've been getting through it with relative like there were parts in Link's Awakening when I generally struggle with some of the puzzle solving and like how to figure out where to go next. And I feel like Echoes is a little more straightforward, maybe just for like their attempt at like a first game with this ecosystem and having Zelda. Like I get it. But I think it's a pretty good, like it's a solid Switch game. I would highly recommend it. If you've enjoyed Zelda on the Switch so far, there's no reason not to get it.
Okay, perfect. You got me sold. I was already sold, but you got me even more sold now, Eric.
I'll send my invoice to Miyamoto. I'm just doing his work on here. So
I was sold on stacking beds. But I was it's like Baldur's Gate 3 when you're stacking crates and you jump up to the top of a castle.
Yeah, it's kind of like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, where it's very rare that I've like come across a puzzle and I've like tried to do something and like the idea in my mind hasn't worked in concept. Like even if it hasn't solved the puzzle, like the thing I was trying to do would at least worked in concept.
Yeah.
So and there are some way smarter people on like TikTok and Instagram doing, of course, like way crazier shit than just me like stacking 4 beds on top of each other. They're like entire like contraptions that like launch them and all this kind of stuff. So there's some real creativity in that game. It's just I'm dumb, so I'm gonna go for the simplest option every time. But
nice.
Okay, anything else you guys want to add in, or should we move on to the game of the hour?
I'm good to go.
Let's do it. Let's go.
All right, today we are talking about the recently released game Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2. I'll probably be referring to it as just like Warhammer 40K or Space Marine 2 because I don't want to say 40,000 every time. But let's just get a little bit of general information here about the game. Space Marine 2 is a hack and slash third-person shooter video game set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and it is a sequel to the 2011 360 PS3 game Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine. Space Marine 2 was developed by Saber Interactive and published by Focus Entertainment for Windows, Xbox, and PS5. The original 2011 game was developed by Relic Entertainment and published by THQ, but we know that THQ is no longer with us in the way that they were back in 2011. The THQ trademark was acquired by Nordic when THQ declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Space Marine 2 is set during the 41st millennium during what is known as the Era Indomitus, which began with the return of the Ultramarine Primarch Robute Guilliman and the launch of the 10-year Indomitus Crusade. The plot follows the continuing story of Demetrian Titus from the first Space Marine game. After being imprisoned by the Inquisition for accusations of heresy, Titus joined what is known as the Death Watch as a form of self-imposed penance, but has returned back to his chapter, the Ultramarines, after a near-death encounter with the Tyranids, who have reemerged in the western part of the galaxy, beginning the Fourth Tyrannic War. I'm sure the Warhammer fans will know all about all of that background information, even more than I presented. So, Space Marine 2 was announced on December 9th, 2021, during a trailer at the Game Awards before its release. It features a single-player campaign that can be played co-op, as well as challenging co-op missions called Operations, and 3 competitive PvP modes called Annihilation, Seize Ground, and Capture and Control. In the social PvP and PvE modes, players can choose from a variety of classes and customize their Space Marine with different cosmetic unlockables representing a wide variety of the different Space Marine chapters and legions. I have some review scores here just to kind of provide some context for any conversation. Metacritic, it is sitting at an 83 for the PC, 82 on PS5, and 83 on Xbox. Weird that it's 1 point lower on PS5. Wonder why that is. Eurogamer has it at a 4 out of 5. Games Radar Plus, 4 out of 5. IGN, an 8 out of 10. PC Gamer, 60 out of 100. PC Games N, 6 out of 10. Man, PC Gaming Magazine sites just being haters right now. Push Square, 9 out of 10. And GameSpot gave it an 8 out of 10. And, of course, Space Marine 2 is the latest in a long line of Warhammer 40K games, the most recent of which you might have heard of as being Warhammer 40K Bolt Gun and Warhammer 40K Dark Tide. And I'm not joking. There are so many Warhammer games. It's insane. Yeah. It's insane. So some of that information, guys, I'll toss it back over to you. And you guys can choose who you want to go first. What is your guys' personal thoughts, experiences with Space Marine 2? How did you come to hear about it? What made you want to get it? And do you have any experience with kind of Warhammer as a whole?
I'll let you go, Will.
Well, as far as overall 40K, honestly, my first real experience came not from the games, but from the actual tabletop, like the figurine games itself.
Oh.
Way back when I was a young lad, still either the very end of college or fresh out of college. My current then girlfriend, I almost said current girlfriend. Sorry about that, Sarah. My then girlfriend, now wife, mother of my child. She had a roommate who her roommate's boyfriend, so, twice removed from me, of course, was actually into Warhammer. And I'd never really heard about it before, but I just knew this was the thing that this guy took his paycheck every 2 weeks and he blew it all on figurines that he would then paint. And I was like, yeah. I don't understand, what is the draw? What is so cool about it? And he gave me the spiel, and it sounds really cool, but I didn't really have a concept. I didn't have a full lock on there until I actually played the original Space Marines game. So I did play it when it first came out. I went back recently and looked at my achievements to see. I know I didn't beat it because I didn't get all the way to the very end, but I know I played it enough to really enjoy it, because when they first announced Space Marine 2, something triggered in my lizard brain back in my head. I was like, oh hell yeah, we're back. I was like, we're so back. We've never been more back. And I was like, I remember this, and I remember this being really good. So I'm excited for 2. And yeah, 2 came out, a blast of a game. I honestly haven't played much Warhammer. I know I looked at Vermintide when it came out. I looked at Darktide when it came out. They were at varying levels of PC first and then coming to console, from what I recall. So I know I didn't jump onto it immediately. I think I can now, if I wanted to, play them all on PC and on console. And I know Bolt Gun, which people have said is pretty solid, versus some people saying not so solid, but it's on Game Pass. So at this point, I'm very much kind of in your same camp, Eric, where I am full on the 40K train right now. I'm looking up wikis. I'm not reading books. I'm not reading books yet because there's 400, and I'm not that crazy. But
Oh my God, there's
yeah,
400.
it's like ridiculous. But
Oh
there's
my
there's
God.
lots of audiobooks to kind of listen to and check out. And then Bolt Gun right now, if I'm not mistaken, as of the time of this recording, is on Game Pass. So why not a little boomer shooter with some 40K skin on top of it? So you might as well check it out and have fun blasting away some baddies. But yeah, that's been my overall like history with the game and the kind of series itself. But just as you learn more, like it just gets deeper. It's a crazy rabbit hole that you go down. You start reading about some stuff and the different organs that the Space Marines have, and the kind of like crazy significantly more than the Spartan kind of like augmentations they go through in order to wear their armor and be the way that they are. And then you're like, oh, this is crazy. It can't get much crazier than that. You start reading about the chaos gods and the literal demons that are inhabiting the world. I'm like, oh, it can't get much crazier than that. And the god emperor that everyone prays to and adores being from like 8,000 BC, an amalgamation of 2,000 shaman priests that killed themselves at the same time to then merge into one giant soul in the afterlife to fight chaos demons. And I'm just like, what in the hell? Like, like where's the edge? There's no edge. Every time you keep on going, you get like closer and closer to like the event horizon of craziness. Like, oh, this series is incredible.
Yeah.
Nick, what about you?
I can't say that my experience from Will is actually much different from him. I'm actually frankly surprised because this, hearing this is the first time I've actually heard he was in contact with any a tabletop player. He's been exposed to the actual sickness that is,
Touch the warp.
Yeah, he's touched the warp for sure.
Careful, brother. That's heresy.
That's a heresy, brother. Yeah, obviously, I had looked at and I had played I dabbled a little bit in Dark Tide. I played like 2 games and deleted it from my console. I'm not really a big fan. It's like an extraction shooter, and it's not really my huge cup of tea. But yeah, like you both have said at this point, there's a ton of Warhammer video games out there, and it's like Warhammer is pretty big. I mean, the Games Workshop is almost in every city, so like to not know about Warhammer is I would understand it if someone's just not into kind of like nerdy, tabletop gaming / video gaming culture to not know what Warhammer 40K is. But like I was recently exposed to it like, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. And it's just been really, really cool. Obviously, I have another good friend of mine who does not only Warhammer, but also War Machine and some of the other peripheral spinoffs that other competitors have come to try and match up to Games Workshop with, especially because, a lot of the Warhammer figurines and the minis are just like so exorbitantly expensive and everything changes all the time. It's kind of like Magic, the way that those niche specialty tabletop gaming things go. But he exposed me to how cool it was to like paint your own miniatures, and I have a couple of mine. But yeah, seeing this game, Space Marine 2, presented at the Game Awards earlier, at the end of last year, I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. There was no hype buildup. Nobody knew that it was in development. And I thought it was like a perfect thing that Saber was working on this with Focusrite Interactive, especially because of their work that they've done alongside, Focusrite, with the Alien franchise as well. Like they're really good at, adept at handling, dark materials, the sci-fi fantasy world. So I was like, and just looking purely at the gameplay footage and the capture footage of this game, I was like, this looks incredibly beautiful. And Will, who is, I'm sure, one of 12 people that played Space Marine 1 when it came out in 2011 was like, oh, you didn't know about Space Marine, bro? Oh, this game is gas. This game is so good. I was like, well, if the homie sponsors it, I guess I'm playing. And I am so happy. I'm so happy I did. Because it's like, I love sci-fi fantasy. Like that's like my niche genre. Like it's the same reason why I love things like Star Wars and Halo and all of that. That's just like my pocket when it comes to like my taste profile. And then like when you add a layer of grimdark on top of it and just kind of like the horrific things that you learn about as you go deeper and deeper into the warp that is Warhammer 40K. Yeah, I fell in love with this game, and I kind of fell in love with the universe. And, I've already ordered up the first 4 books of the Horus Heresy on Amazon. So I'm falling in deep. I'm falling in deep, gentlemen.
Yeah. Well, my experience actually goes back to that Game Awards 2021. And I got to say that honestly, until I did the research and saw that, I didn't know that this game was debuted at the Game Awards 2021 because Jeff Keighley just blasts us with so much information. And I probably remember seeing it and I was just like, oh, Warhammer, okay, like that's kind of cool, I guess. I'd known about Warhammer because it was like tabletop adjacent to the game that I was really into, Dungeons and Dragons. I played Dungeons and Dragons for probably 2/3 of my life. So I think through my experience of like going into like game stores and stuff, I'm pretty sure I had like seen Warhammer 40K and been experienced to it and seen like the miniatures and stuff like that. But that was really my only kind of experience to anything Warhammer up until a few years ago when I remember seeing an interview with now King of the Nerds, Henry Cavill, saying that he was a huge Warhammer 40K guy. And I was like, oh, like that's, most famous people wouldn't come out and say they're a fan of like such a nerdy thing like that, especially something that now I've done some research, I realize is as deep as Warhammer 40K. But I think that kind of just stuck in my algorithm. And every once in a while, I would just get fed like a Warhammer 40K video or like it's something from like a short animated film or just something talking about like a little bit of the lore like here and there. I didn't really think anything much of it. I thought it was cool. Honestly, my adventure with Space Marine 2 starts because of Helldivers 2. And the same hype from Helldivers 2 that got me to buy that game also got me to buy Space Marine 2 because I was seeing like the beta and my TikTok algorithm feed, I was seeing the people as the gigantic Space Marine dudes in armor fighting like these hordes of the Tyranids, and it's just so violent and visceral, and it triggered something in my brain. I'm like, this is like a classic like Gears of War style like 360 game, and it looks incredible. It looks awesome, and I bought into the hype because I thought it was going to be the similar type of game that Helldivers 2 was. I thought it would just be kind of like fighting alien hordes and doing objectives and stuff, and I didn't realize it would be so heavily ingrained in the Warhammer 40K lore. So when I got the game and realized that it was kind of this like narrative experience, that kind of encouraged me to start doing and taking the deep dive. And Will is not joking. There are wormholes inside of wormholes inside of wormholes inside of wormholes. When he said that there's no edge to it, there is literally no edge. Some of those wiki articles are super daunting because it seems like every other word has like a hyperlink to another wiki article on something else. And you guys know me, the lore junkie that I am for Kingdom Hearts. I started going down the YouTube rabbit hole. I was just like binging the videos on the Emperor and the Horus Heresy and all the different factions and all this stuff. And it's such... There's no fantasy world that I've encountered that has the breadth and scope of lore that Warhammer has. It's insane. 400 books. You can find multi-hour videos on any single Warhammer topic that you search because it's that deep. It's that expansive. And both of the guys are right. Everything in the Warhammer 40K universe is terrifying and awful. And when you think you found something awful, I guarantee you there's something worse than that thing you just found. Anything that you think is terrible, there's something that's 100 times more horrifying than that thing that you just discovered. Like it's a never, like the tagline that you see, it's like in the grim dark future of the 40th millennia or whatever, there's only war. Like that's not a joke. It would suck to live in this universe. Like they have the games where it's like, what game universe would you like to live in? Nobody better pick Warhammer 40K. No. That would be horrifying.
That would be the worst choice you ever made. Will just asked me, he was like, do you want to, you can't take a U-turn. You have two exits. You have to go to Raccoon City or Silent Hill 2. And I was like, well, let's just go to Raccoon City. They make it out of Raccoon City. Nobody makes it out of Warhammer. Nobody makes it out of this one.
If one of those exits is Warhammer, I don't care what the other exit is. You do not take the Warhammer
I'm
exit.
crashing the car.
Yes. Just plow into the median, into the divide.
There you go.
But I went down the rabbit hole and something about the game just itched this like they said I don't want to be like, oh, it's like Gears of War, it's 360 game, because I feel like that like comparison is iterative, and we'll talk about how the game feels and plays in a later section, but that's really what it is, and that's the kind of the game they set out to play, and the game plays incredibly. And I gotta shout out, we'll talk about it in gameplay, but I gotta shout out that the way that they integrate the game, at least I played it on PS5 with the DualSense controller. They used the DualSense controller to absolute perfection in this game with the way like the big guns shoot, and you feel the swings of the heavy weapons. It's and you feel like the stomping of your Space Marine. It's absolutely incredible. And I think the most incredible thing about it is as I'm like researching the lore, as I'm diving into the stories, I can tell that Saber had a lot of respect for like the source material, because after like watching the tons of YouTube videos and watching creators talk about the game and Warhammer, everything in the way that Space Marine 2 is presented seems to be very, very respectful of like the lore of Warhammer. And I think that's probably the best thing about this game, is that it's like 100% accurate to the material that they've been provided. And fuck, 400 books, it seems like they definitely had a lot to work with. So yeah, this game is it doesn't I don't think it'll ever be up for like anything like Game of the Year, but it's incredible for what it does. And I think it's a really great game. Just to kind of spoil my thoughts right off the bat, it's something that I'm very happy that the hype train got me, and I'm very happy to have spent money on. Is that kind of your guys' experience as well? I know that you guys got to play some co-op and stuff. You guys think if you were telling somebody to spend $60 on this, would you tell them to spend $60 on it?
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Especially
like, I mean, you mentioned the Gears thing too. Is like, if you're looking for something to kind of fill that hole, once again, not a 1-to-1, but this is going to scratch that itch. Like, yeah. As me personally, only speaking for myself, Gears has kind of let me down these last couple of years, and I'm looking for something that's like in that same vein. And here comes Space Marine, boom, just hit all that spot. You know, you got the Horde-esque mode with the operations missions, the single player story itself, while short, and I have no problem with that, considering the lifestyle I have now, is surprisingly like fun, well voice acted, well put together. It's definitely not some kind of an afterthought for like the multiplayer or co-op train. Single player is great. And then even the PvP, which it took me a little while to warm up to, but while yes, once again, not a Gears of War PvP style, it plays very well for exactly what it does. It gets you in and out. It does not waste your time, and I feel like ultimately it's balanced appropriately, as in everyone kind of has like their strengths, right? I can't look at maybe there's one or two classes where it's just like, oh, they're not as great, but that doesn't mean you're not going to be able to kill somebody or do something. It just means you have to kind of play smarter than the average bear. But no, very fun, very well fleshed out. You mentioned, I think in the notes here as well, the customization is great. So if anything, if you just love playing Dress Up Darling, boom, get yourself on here. I would say it doesn't matter if you're, boy, girl, as long as you're over, I guess, 17, 18 for the ESRB. but if you like dressing up stuff and you don't want to fight and shoot, boom, hop in there, dress up your Space Marine. You can make a Gundam, you can make Optimus Prime, You can do whatever you want to do. Like, the customization is awesome.
Yeah, it's really interesting that we're talking about this as, just specifically focusing on the part, Eric, when you were talking about the respect and the love and kind of, I guess, the dedication that Saber Interactive put into like respecting and acknowledging and incorporating the lore from 40K. Like, this makes Space Marine 2 kind of like the antithesis to a product that you get like the Halo show on Paramount Plus, right? Like, those creators over there for the Halo show took an incredible existing property with arguably not equal lore, but expansive lore with many books, multiple games. People understand the lore very well, and said, they said, nah, I'm going to do my own thing. And then they did their own thing, and it was trash, right? Like,
we have to show Master Chief's butt.
Exactly. Like, this game, Space Marine 2, is the complete opposite of them taking not only what is an expansive, like, kind of pool, a very, very deep pool of lore that they have to pull upon, but then packaging it in a game, in a title that is super accessible for newcomers to the franchise, or newcomers to the kind of the history and the lore itself. It was so funny playing this game in real time and then watching people's reactions on Twitter. And the first time somebody like came across one of those, like one of the baby mechanical angels that are inside of the spacecraft, that they were like, oh, what the fuck? And then all of the OG Warhammer fans coming out of the Warriors be like, brother, you ain't seen nothing yet.
That's the tip of the iceberg, my guy.
Tippy top of the iceberg. And it was incredible. But yeah, like, to kind of just like focus on what you were saying in terms of this being a tight packaged product, like, it is reminiscent of the days of the 360 days, where you can jump in and spend 15 hours on a campaign, get it in, get it done, and play with your friends, and it kind of just be a light, effervescent experience. Like, they take themselves just seriously enough and then they back off, and then they kind of let the player have fun. And that's a very, very hard line to walk in 2024 when everybody has these expectations of, I need a 90-hour campaign with 30 additional hours of trophy work that I need to work on, right? And don't let Will fool you. He's put in, probably what would be around 70 to 80 hours in this title right now. So
yeah.
60, it's only 60, but
it's only 60.
Yeah, you don't nearly need to put in that amount of time to like finish the campaign, but just enjoy this game. And I think that's one of the beautiful parts about it. Just stunning on all fronts.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that too, that it is kind of welcoming to newcomers, because you might be, if you're listening to this episode and like haven't played the game yet, you might be like, oh God, there's like 30-hour lore videos I have to watch. No, you don't have to watch anything. I went into this game completely, I knew the baseline like minimum I could possibly know about anything in Warhammer. And I love storytelling like this because the storytelling just kind of like follows the characters along and they interact with their world in like a natural way. And by them interacting with the world, you kind of like learn little things about it, and they don't turn to the camera every time and be like, by the way, the Mechanicus is this, or like, by the way, the Tyranids are this, and we've been fighting them for 10,000 years or whatever. They talk about these things naturally, and you experience them in the story as it progresses. And you kind of just like, if your media literacy is a decent, you kind of just pick up on things, and by context you can be like, oh yeah, like I remember they talked about that thing, or they mentioned that this or that or the other thing. And I really love when storytelling like respects a player that much to like trust them to pick up on the things and not have to be like, oh, I have to give you like a 40-hour like the thing about explaining about what all these different things are. I think that's a really, really great way to tell a story. Also, one funny thing, I really like how earlier in the year we were all on board for like Helldivers, and like we're all like democracy and we have to spread democracy to the galaxy. And Warhammer 40,000 could not be further on the spectrum away from that, because everything in Warhammer is meant to be like a caricature of like all the worst parts of the human race, and it's very much like this theocratic fascist state. And it's like, but all of a sudden, like on TikTok and on social media, we're like, oh, now we got to fight for the emperor. It's like, so it's like the complete opposite end of that spectrum. Both you guys started going into some gameplay stuff, so that's a nice transition to like talking about some of the gameplay. Right off the top, the game is a power fantasy. It does a great job of nailing what you would expect the feel of a space marine to be. These are huge, hulking, like there are regular sized people in this game, and they come up to maybe like the hip of a normal sized space marine. Like space marines are like maybe like 10 feet tall. And the game has like this weird kind of weight to it to make you feel like, oh yeah, I'm actually this really heavy, bulky dude. But that doesn't translate to slow gameplay. It's kind of like counterintuitive, where it's like, yeah, you feel the weight, but that doesn't really limit you or your mobility in kind of any way, because you can still like dodge or roll out of the way or make your way through the levels like pretty quickly. You're not just kind of like lumbering slowly across the landscape. So I thought that was a really amazing way they were able to kind of balance that feeling. It's vicious, it's gory, fun in the best way possible. Like we said, it's the same way that Gears of War was. I know we keep making that comparison, but that's just an easy way for you to understand that this is the type of game it is. Yeah. I would say that it's Gears of War amped up to 11. I feel like the gore and the scale of the enemy encounters dwarfs anything that you would ever encounter in a Gears of War. I mean, just the sheer number of anything that's on screen at any one time is almost overwhelming when you see those hordes coming for you. So I know we were kind of diving into some different stuff. Do you guys have any kind of general thoughts on the gameplay when you first jump into it? You're playing the story missions. Any kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that like when you think about Marcus and Dom and Coltrane from Gears of War, they're basically like what the guardsmen are in Space Marine 2. You know, they're gonna get splattered if an Astartes steps towards them the wrong way. No, it's definitely fun. All due respect to the goats over there for Gears of War, but no, you're absolutely right. I would say that like it's really interesting kind of thinking about the comparisons. I feel like the chainsword goes a long way to like for people to be like, they think about the Lancer 1-for-1, we're chainsawing enemies in half, and it's like it's so much more than that. Something that really surprised me about Space Marine 2, specifically just like the visceral like moments of like the combat gameplay, like you're getting in the thick of it. You are getting your hands dirty, especially because of the enemies you're fighting. As you progress later on, and we can get to it later, you're fighting other enemies at range, but right in the beginning you're fighting the Tyranids, right? And so you have to get nasty. Like you're killing Xenos left and right. And I was frankly surprised because I went in with the expectation, oh, okay, third person shooter, bolt gun, this is going to be like a cover based shooter or something like that. No, the emphasis in this game is so much more heavily on melee combat, getting your parries down, getting your perfect dodges down, and kind of just learning enemy movesets, and then just juggling things all at once. Like, right, like when the Starties are in there and they're surrounded by Tyranid swarms, you have multiple Tyranids that are jumping on you, and you have blue flashing marks that you have to press parry at the right time in order to like not take, any damage to your armor. But they have a really well balanced system as well when it comes to like just juggling, like, obviously getting low on health. Like this game does an excellent job when we talk about that visceral combat of there are so many times Will and I were playing together, whether it's campaign or PvE, where I have maybe a fraction of my health bar left, but I know I have my shields. So as long as I can get one good parry in, or if I can get one perfect dodge in, like I know I'm going to be okay. And it's just like there's that razor's edge of like knowing that death is right around the corner. Of course, you're going to die a bunch of times too, but still, it's like whenever you don't, you feel like you're in the action. You feel like you're in the thick of it. So they did a great job of immersing us.
Yep. And piggybacking on that too, one of my favorite things in gaming in general, especially, and it's brought right here to Space Marine to very great effect, is the whole staying aggressive. Even characters that have shields, like the Bulwark, for example, you're still meant to really be in the thick of it and be brawling and fighting, whether you want to shoot or, get in there with that nice visceral melee combat. Because even something as simple as, hey, you got hit by an enemy, that's perfectly fine. You have your health drop, and then you have that white part of your bar that is what your health used to be. If you hit your enemy, your health comes back. So it really, pushes you to be aggressive and stay into the middle of a fight. Like, yeah, it looks maybe kind of silly from a survival standpoint to jump into a pack of 10 enemies. But as long as I know I keep tapping R1 and my health is going to stay up as long as I'm still smacking people, it really puts that smile on your face, right? It keeps you happy in the moment, bathed in gore and blood and screaming for the Emperor. And that really carries you throughout your mission after mission after mission. Like I said, 60 hours in, I'm still seeing executions I've been seeing from, hour 3, and I'm like smiling ear to ear each time. So
Yeah.
That just really is a testament to the overall quality of the game, and then just how strong the loop is. One thing I love from the gaming in general, once again, too, is I always like the idea of the gameplay loop, where it's like, okay, how can I kind of drip feed a player fun for 15, 30 seconds at a time, and then keep them on that treadmill so that, you look over at your clock and you've been playing for 3 hours without realizing it. In Space Marines 2 is that kind of game that hits the 30-second, 15-second happiness kind of clock really consistently over and over and over again.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I remember seeing, I don't remember if it was the one of the high-ranking guys at Saber, if it was Focus, say that was basically their guiding principle when they were designing a game, is they wanted to have just this really, really addictive combat loop that you just wouldn't get tired of, and that's basically the premise of the entire game. Yeah, I agree with Will. And anytime a game rewards you for being aggressive and allows you to be aggressive, that's good. And those systems are there. I'm glad he mentioned the health thing, because I just wrote it in the notes as the Bloodborne health thing, because Bloodborne does a similar thing. When you take damage, if you stay aggressive and hit enemies, you'll recover that damage. So there's a risk reward factor there that allows you to sustain and be aggressive in combat. And yeah, I think that was one of the most surprising things to me about this game, was how much that emphasis is on getting into the thick of that, just jumping up there. And like you said, there are enemies later in the game that lean themselves to a more like ranged kind of play style. You have to be a little bit more careful than just running up to them. But I'd say a large chunk of the game focuses on that hand-to-hand, that melee combat. And it's very, very cool that they give you those opportunities to sustain yourself. Like you said, you do the parries, you get armor back when the game rewards you for engaging with the way it wants you to play, and allows you to literally, if you execute all of your parries and all this stuff and play the game the right way, stand amidst this horde of enemies and just be a god and sustain yourself in that horde and not die and not get overwhelmed. And It's incredible. Like I said, it's almost to the detriment of the shooting because on a DualSense controller, the shooting feels so incredible. Which by the way, you can look up the lore of the bolt guns, and that's fucking insane. That the
nuts.
bolt guns, the bolt guns don't shoot bullets; they shoot like mini rockets, essentially. And you really feel that in like the adaptive triggers of the DualSense, and it feels really, really incredible. So yeah, that's your like basic gameplay loop, and I think Saber absolutely like knocked it out of the park. You guys mentioned the campaign a little bit of stuff. I wanted to talk to you guys specifically because you guys had the chance to experience this. I did not, and I really, really regret not being able to engage with it just in that busy life. The co-op opportunities and the co-op experiences playing this game. And Will, I'm really keen to hear your opinion on the PvP specifically. Mm-hmm. What is that experience like? Because I remember trying to engage with some of the co-op stuff like by myself. Like I tried some of those operations missions, and even on the easiest difficulty, I got my ass handed to me. I was just like getting blown away, overwhelmed. So it really seems designed in a way you need to have a squad of people, and you really need to work with each other to kind of achieve the mission, achieve the goal, and really like rely on each other's abilities to like keep each other alive. So, Will, I'll toss it back to you. What was kind of your experience? I want to hear on the operation stuff, and then I also want to hear kind of what's the PvP like?
For sure. So with operations starting off, you got at least 6 different operations missions, and I just love it that it's not just kind of like an aside, hey, we're going to throw some missions together willy-nilly and then let you play them, but they're actually tied into the single player. So many times when you're playing through the single player as Titus, you're speaking to the additional team members that you send off to do like, B missions, C missions. And then they have a little back and forth chatter on the comm, whatever you're doing your own thing as Titus. And then when you're playing the operations and you're playing as those members, which each class is unique, you can only have one of each class on a team at any given time. So it does kind of make you and your 2 other friends, like maybe pick and match. We can't be 3 bulwarks with a shield and a sword. I have to be a sniper. Nick can be the assault class with the jetpack and the giant hammer. And then, Eric, if you were playing, you would, be the tactician with the scan move where that does extra damage to enemies and then allows you to see some invisible enemies that occasionally pop up in the game. So just using that kind of combination of your teammates' moves, and everyone has their own special. Everyone's, obviously kind of being in there with their unique powers. Some people just have melee weapons and sidearms versus someone that actually has the more kind of heavy duty, either giant bolt guns. They have the melta guns, which is my favorite, like the kind of fire shotgun, which is really incredible. But going through those different missions that are each tied into that single player. So, for example, one of them is you have to get to the very end of the mission. There is a train that you have to defend, and then that train is strapped with a nuclear device that you send off to blow up an entire hive of Xenos, right? So, that's just the basic story for one of those 6 missions. Another one involving killing a giant hell dragon that's like a kind of chaos enemy spawn thing. And that's just a normal day in the life of an Astartes, right? It's what we do.
Just clocking in for their shift,
Hey, just another day in paradise, brother. So it's, I don't know, those are really, really fun. The thing that really keeps you there as far as the loop of, aside from just the gameplay, is that each of your weapons and then your individual classes as well, you level up, not just for kind of, damage or function, but of course also style and class. So you unlock different skins for your weapons. You unlock different types of weapons. So your pistol goes from your standard bolt gun pistol all the way up to like a bolt gun alpha prime pistol that, does 3 times as much damage. You have 3 times the amount of bullets, things like that. So it really strives for you to not only do increased difficulties, like you mentioned, the kind of lower difficulty all the way up to about 4 different ones, going from trivial to ruthless, which ruthless gets really crazy at those higher levels. Like it starts throwing the mini bosses that you play through the single player at you. You're like 2 steps into the mission, it's like, oh, here's a Carnifex.
Shit.
Yep. It's like, oh, here's a Hellbrute. I'm like, oh, cool. I have no ammo. This is great.
I didn't want to have fun today. It's fine.
That's literally how it feels sometimes. But ultimately, it's just really a blast of a time just kind of playing through those missions over and over and over again, even though I've done each one at this point like 6 different times. Between the difficulties, the different classes you can play as, and then the different weapons that you can bring to the table, it does have a nice, unique freshness. So I think that treadmill is awesome. Quickly talking about the PvP. As I mentioned before, I was initially kind of iffy on it because I was like, oh, it's, we're running around. There are a couple of downsides for me. Number one being there's no true executions like there are. I don't think we really talked about it too much yet, but executions are a main draw for like the actual gameplay and the fighting itself against the enemies that you're fighting in PvE and the single player. So having them not in PvP was kind of a letdown for me because I was getting ready to like go to a downed, Space Marine and rip his head off. And then he just kind of flopped over after I shot him. I was like, oh, sad.
That's sad.
But you have 3 different game modes. You have like a team deathmatch, which is annihilation. You have a capture and control, I believe, which is kind of like you chase the point around. It's almost like a hard point if you've played on Call of Duty before. And then there's the normal ground control, which is just like you have 3 different places, and then you capture them, each one, and it's got what's it called? Got domination, I think. It would be like another Call of Duty kind of staple.
Would you say that like people are really sweaty on it right now?
As of right now, I would say it's probably getting more sweaty as, people drop off the game and do other things because the people left there are the ones that are wanting to play. So if you want to play some PvP, I think now is the time before you get on in like 3 months and it's just all the level 50, assault people just dive bombing you over and over and over again. But just like how the PvP, you bring those unique factors, you can have 2 of each class on a team for the PvP. But it really is just up to you and your team to use those skills in kind of tandem combination with each other. Something like the heavy has a big shield that can block fire from the front, which is really important for when you're doing those team fights. And then maybe even like a sniper can go invisible, sneak behind enemy lines, and then, take out a high priority target before kind of zipping away. So lots of different ways to really just get in and out. But as I kind of mentioned at the top of the time too, no real class feels so weak that you can't potentially one-on-one somebody else, or at least if you're sneaking up behind somebody, right, you can get some kills here and there. But teamwork is significantly more necessary than I thought it would be. It has not really been my experience while playing the PvP that you can kind of hard carry a team. Not saying it can't be done, but yeah, if at least 2 people are working together playing in tandem, it becomes significantly more difficult as like a 1v2 to take somebody out.
I like that because the lore of Space Marines, the lore of Warhammer seems to suggest that like brotherhood and fighting together are like a really big deal. So I think that's really cool that that's kind of emphasized. And immediately when I was playing the co-op missions by myself, I've realized pretty quickly that the stupid computers would just kind of run off and leave me alone. Yeah. And that's when it clicked. I was like, oh, this is meant to be played with other people so that you can kind of support each other and have your abilities synergize with one another. Yep. So that's, So Nick, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Just to echo what you're saying, 100%. I mean, even if you can toggle, if I believe this is right, but you could toggle online matchmaking. So if you were to load into it, you could play with randoms. I don't know if I don't particularly like playing with randoms because I'm not trying to jump on comms with just anybody out there that has a PSN account, you know what I mean? But like, it's one of those things where, definitely it's meant to be played with human beings because even Will and I, when we were playing, just the 2 of us and then a third, NPC character, your CPU was jumping in the game. Yeah, they weren't doing anything. They're supposed to be a sniper class. They were like running around with a combat knife. Like I wasn't really sure. That probably wasn't as optimized or something that they really wanted to spend a lot of development time or QA time to focus on. But yeah, I mean, I can only echo, I think Will killed it. I can only echo everything he said. I think the coolest part about the co-op operations to me is the fact that when you really look at it from, a perspective, it is interesting because in the lore of the main story, it's like Titus is on the the Vox comms, right? They just call it the Vox, right? With the other Space Marines that are within the Ultramarine chapter that he's deploying from, and he's asking them to accomplish the task that you're doing in the co-op operations mode. But the thing is that I thought what was really cool is that I feel like Saber could have easily just like left this half-baked. They didn't need to do anything with it, but there are so many cool hype things that happen in the operations mode that I'm like, I would only strongly recommend everybody who has friends, on the PlayStation or whatever the case may be, because this is multi-platform, friends on and this is cross-play, to just jump in and play, because it feels like it completes and it like helps you understand the context of the main campaign a little bit more. Like Will said, like you see one of the demons that occurs later on. You also are fighting against some of the enemies that you also see, or it helps you understand the missing pieces that are like within, you know, Titus's story, which is just so cool. But yeah, no, it's definitely really fun. I would say from a technical perspective, because I play this on both PC, I play this on Steam and PlayStation, that I think that the cross-play functionality whenever we were doing operations was a little bit more seamless playing on PlayStation when it was just Will and I. Like, we didn't have any issues, you know, glitching out. Whenever there was an issue, it was because I was on PC. A lot of times, it will keep me honest here if I'm wrong, but like there were a lot of times when we were playing, it was me, Will, and then even who was playing on PlayStation, I was on PC, and then we had our friend Nave from Gaming Together podcast playing on Xbox. And so, you know, all of the tribes were united, you know, for the Emperor in this situation. But it was a little bit, there was some technical issues. I feel like that might have been because we were playing so early after launch. I would imagine they're probably going to smooth that out with, you know, whatever patch updates that are going to come through. But yeah, I feel like if you're playing on the same ecosystem or the same, you know, console network, that might be a little bit of a smoother experience for folks who are listening.
Yeah, and just what Nick was saying. Sorry, Eric, but just to confirm,
the only note I had was I think that was the reason for like the 1 point difference in the PS5 Metascore, because I remember reading when it came out that the PS5 in particular had some like weird connection issues, at least when the game first came out. Like people couldn't like log on to the online matchmaking or anything like that. So that might be the difference. But we'll go ahead.
Yeah, it was just exactly what you were saying there. It was because it was so early in. They had a patch recently that came out, and I haven't really had any connection issues, whether it be, you know, PlayStation, PC, Xbox people since then. So not that it's fully done, but it's significantly better than it was before, because I can agree. I look past it because I love the game a lot, but there were quite a few times where I would just be stuck trying to load into the server, and I have to like reboot the game over and over, which is the true sign of love for something, is when I'm just like, hey, the game crashed, whatever, I'll boot it back up and play again. Oh, it crashed again. Whatever, I'll boot it back up and play again. It like took me to the days when my 360 would red ring, and I'm like, I guess I'll just send it into Microsoft and they'll send me another one.
Yeah, there were, I play most of the game like solo and in offline mode, and there were like a lot of prompts that anytime I like tried to do something or like I was like in the menus or trying to look at stuff, it did prompt me to want me to log in, and that created a couple of like errors like really early on, like some weird connection issues, because I was just like, I'm playing the game offline solo by myself. I don't have to connect the internet, so just leave me alone. But I think besides that, like we kind of expect internet things to happen when games come out. That's just kind of a fact of games that are online nowadays. I mean, a very rare has a game launched where there aren't significant or at least somewhat online issues day one. So I can understand that. I think on the flip side though, you know, Nick was talking about some like Star Wars Outlaws that kind of launches in like the game launches in kind of a broken-ish state. And that's kind of become the way that games have been coming out lately, is they're kind of, oh, this is a broken game, we'll kind of fix it and work on it, and it'll be better. Like the promise is that it'll be better like a couple patches from now or a couple months from now. And aside from the online stuff, I found that Space Marine 2 was it functioned better than probably 95% of stuff I've played recently, or things that you've heard about recently. Like it was not the core gameplay loop, the core things you wanted to experience worked when I downloaded it on day one. And I think that I mean, I don't mean to like applaud Saber for being like, hey, you launched a game that wasn't broken, like good job, because you know, I think that should be like the minimum expectation that we should have for games coming out. And I understand, I know making games is hard, and there are bored people that want the game to launch now because they want their money, blah blah blah, whatever. But I think you can look at Space Marine 2 and be like, this game worked when it came out, and I understand that this is probably a simpler game than you know, mechanically. And again, I'm not Eric the game dev here. I'm purely speculating on what it takes to make stuff like this. I have no doubt that making something on the scale of like a Star Wars Outlaws is probably more challenging because there's more to account for. And Space Marine 2 seems to be like a more simplified gameplay loop that just looks really, really good. And maybe because there's less you have, I don't know, I'm kind of spiraling here, but games should work when they launch is I guess what I'm trying to say. And Space Marine 2 worked when it launched. I had one other thing I wanted to say about game. I don't know. Maybe I didn't. What do you say we move on to the way the game looked, the audio and visual presentation? All I got to say is that this game is visually stunning. There's so much stuff on screen at any one time, and there were maybe like a handful of times I can count on one hand where maybe I got like slight frame rate dips or the game chugged like just the littlest amount. It was barely noticeable. But the game looks incredible for, you have these moments where you're getting ready to go into combat and you see these tyrannid swarms like coming at you, and they just seem uncountable. And like most of those things that are coming towards you are like things you actually fight. Like the number you see advancing towards you is stuff that you'll have to contend with when they eventually reach you, and you can like try and shoot and throw grenades and thin out the hordes. But the hordes get to you. And in my experience, the game did not like chug or drop frames, and everything was like so incredibly detailed for the amount of stuff that was on the screen. And that's not just like the thousands of alien hordes or the copious amounts of rubble. That was like in the architecture as well. And another amazing thing about the Warhammer universe that I love is it's got this very like gothic medieval architecture mixed with like this sci-fi element to it. Like their spaceships are like fucking flying cathedrals. It's literally insane, and the whole game just looks absolutely gorgeous. And again, I think that can apply to what I said about this in my personal thoughts. I think the game nails what it means to be Lorehammer, and not just Lorehammer in Warhammer, not just in the way that the lore is, but also in like the visuals and the aesthetics too, because you're taking things that are essentially like painted models meant to be played on a tabletop and blowing them up into like these grand proportions to be played in a video game. And, if done a certain way, I could see how maybe that could turn out like a little bit cartoony, a little bit like wonky, but they managed to find a way to make this feel real. I mean, like the Space Marines, they don't just look like blown up painted models. It feels like a living, breathing world that didn't just come off of a tabletop. Like it's something that exists. So I think visually this game is absolutely stunning. I don't know about you guys, but this game looks awesome.
Yeah, I'll say I'm right there with you though. For me, I know I've talked about it till I'm blue in the face when it comes to some of my favorite games, but it's like, for me, it's details. Obviously gameplay is first for me, but a second, details. Even something like looking at the armor for your Space Marine. And, you see the old cuts and gashes and, gouged areas from like previous fights. Like that's the kind of thing where, people aren't just like, shiny, brand new, fresh out the box Buzz Lightyears. I'm like, yeah, this 200-year-old, Astartes has seen some stuff, right? You feel like a grizzled soldier running around when you have these gashes and slices and dirt and grime. And then, of course, the copious amounts of blood that coat you as you're in a melee fight. Nothing's worse than playing a video game, getting into an up-close melee nasty fight, and then coming out looking squeaky clean. Like, I need to be covered in gore, and Space Marine delivers on all fronts there. You get out of a fight with a group of Tyranids, and like you walk over and you're just bathed in it. Like you look like Carrie, and it's just awesome. Same thing when you talked about the architecture. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's probably my favorite part of the game's actual locales, is when you're going through like the major city area about halfway or so through the story. And you just look up and you see like these grand, beautiful looking, stoneware. Of course, it's all destroyed and, kind of beat up from the actual fighting itself, but you see how like gorgeous it was, and frankly still is, even in its kind of destroyed state. And it's such a fun juxtaposition of this kind of like really nice white marbly looking, area, this column, and then of course you're fighting some nasty golem looking creatures and splashing their blood all over the walls. So it's just something that really draws you into it. We talked about it before, we're going to keep talking about it again. The game feels as faithful as it can be from somebody like us who may is not as involved in the lore itself, but it feels so faithful. and it really draws you into the world. Like I'm sitting here, not to pull it, I think it's like the classic IGN line. This game makes you feel like Titus when you're running around and you're beating up on the bad guys.
You feel like Spider-Man. Yeah.
There you go. So I don't know. It's the kind of thing where, once again, just you can get trapped in there, be playing for hours and hours at a time, because the game really beckons you to enjoy it. And luckily it gives you a product that is very easy to enjoy. So it's just like a delicious piece of pie. You keep on eating and eating and eating, and then you look down at your plate and you're like, oh wait, it's gone.
I need more, please.
Also, I need to make the Warhammer. I think I saw that somebody made a podcast already called Warhammer, so we need to buy them out because it needs to be the three of us.
That's exactly right.
Discovering the lore of Warhammer. Yeah, that would be nuts.
It'd be a book club podcast. We cover one book every 8 episodes, right? Yeah, I think I feel like the visual and the audio presentation of this game is really what sells it for me, more than anything else. And it's what pulls me in beyond like what you were saying earlier, Eric, about the incredible way that they kind of drip fed you the lore as well as respected the audience. Like they expected you as the audience to be like, you're in this game, you're playing it, you kind of rock with us already. If you're interested about anything we're saying, go fucking look it up on your own. They don't have a codex. They don't have a glossary of terms. They kind of just throw a bunch of stuff at you and you're just having fun because you're slaying Xenos and heretics for the Emperor, right? So it is really, really incredible. And again, just to like echo what you both have said at this point, you know, the Gothic nature of the cathedrals, seeing like the depictions, the stone pillars of Space Marines holding massive swords while you're in like the galley. It's like this combination of something that seems to be archaic and ancient alongside super deep future high tech. It's just that speaks to me on such a very deep and visceral level. And again, like, you know, walking by and seeing the servitors, you know, with the top of their skulls cut off and their limbs kind of removed, and only thing that their torso is, you know, kind of, I guess, melded in or kind of welded into the wall so they can operate a door switch for the bathroom, right? Like, it's just seeing stuff like that. And then at the same time, understanding, you know, how interesting and desperate the Space Marines are, how the Ultramarines in this case are in this scenario. Just like it all kind of blends together. And of course, like when we saw the footage of the trailer at the Game Awards, and you see, and it's basically footage of Titus walking around one of the first planets, and you see the flying swarms of Tyranids in the background, and just like this ultra 4K high res, you know, kind of visual presentation. You're like, oh, okay, you know, that's the mini cutscene footage. No. This game actually looks the way that you expect it to look based on the gameplay captures that you're seeing online and the trailers and everything. They really did a great job. I would say that it's a little inconsistent. There are times you go later on and, like, you know, face modeling isn't rendering as you would expect it to. Yep. You know, sometimes there are stuff in the foreground or the background it leads a little bit of a kind of polishing to it. But overall, the visual presentation experience is fantastic. It's really outstanding.
I think everything in this game too serves to kind of establish that immersion. And when I think of the immersion of this world, I can't think about how, like, I used the word grand before, about how grand and large everything is in scale. Warhammer. And the visual presentation like reinforces that at every single step of how gigantic these cathedrals are, how gigantic these ships are. When you're just kind of walking around, and even when you're fighting like in your own localized conflicts, you can look out into the sky or look off into the distance and see other fights happening, or like fights happening in the sky, or there's always something happening in like the background of the horizon that I think just adds to how just humongous the world feels. And I think one of the things I've walked away from my very limited understanding of Warhammer is it's grand, it's large, it's grandiose in the most like exaggerated fashion. Mm-hmm. And I think everything that the visual presentation tries to do absolutely lends itself towards that. And I think the audio does as well. I made some notes here that usually the first thing I gravitate to is when I talk about audio presentation is the soundtrack. I thought the soundtrack was fine. I feel like it serves its purpose. There's no like tracks on the soundtrack where I'm like walking around like humming them today. It serves the environment. It serves the conflicts that you're in. It serves the situation that you're in. And I think it's a soundtrack that's written more to reinforce that level of immersion alongside the visual gameplay, rather than to be like this gigantic sweeping orchestral score or like these catchy like earworm kind of soundtracks that Nintendo likes to have. So I thought it was, I think the soundtrack is fine. Like I said, there are no standout tracks on it, but I think it establishes atmosphere and immersion very well. And then when I talk about just some of the sound design of this game, the sound design is absolutely incredible, and I think that again is reinforced by the DualSense controller with the way the guns shoot. They're loud and explosive, and when you're in the thick of fighting all the Tyranids and the Xenos or the Chaos Marines, it feels like squishy and crunchy when you're just slaying the enemies by the tens or the hundreds. And I love that. There's something about like hearing the Xenos go squish that just like triggers like a part of my lizard brain that makes me so happy, and I don't know what it is.
It's fulfilling the will of the Emperor, Eric. That's what exactly
it is. Yes,
but
absolutely.
Just to quickly just touch on that, what you were saying there, playing it on PC is great. I think like performance wise, in my experience, the PC version of Space Marine 2, I think runs the best overall from beginning to end of the game in terms of like the consistency. And obviously it has an uncapped frame rate, right? So I was getting up into the 80s and 90s. When you're surrounded by Tyranids, it's going to drop a little bit because the computer is just processing so much. But the PS5 like performance wasn't anything to laugh at. I think the difference is exactly what you said multiple times at this point, is the feeling of using the DualSense controller, the adaptive triggers when you're shooting like the Melta gun, and even just like the DualSense kind of functionality that they added in that's similar to Astrobot when we were talking about. When you're walking around as a Space Marine, you feel the thud, thud, thud of the footsteps hitting the ground. That's just not present when you obviously, using the Microsoft Xbox controller, the Xbox Elite controller. It's just like not there, right? And it's just not present. And of course, that's probably extra work that Saber Interactive put in, but it's something that kind of just additionally adds another layer of immersion for the player experience too. And then even like looking at it, and this is something that I remember seeing people talk about online, is that the dedication that Saber worked with Games Workshop. I mean, apparently Games Workshop got back to Saber and told them, hey, you didn't get this specific part of their pauldron on the wrist right. So you need to fix that part. And they did it. They literally did it. So again, that's what Will was talking about. The attention to detail is just so there. And seeing Space Marines in real life on a tabletop, kind of that glossy sheen for really, really good painters out there, what it looks like when you're looking at a model in real life. That's what it looks like in game. And it's just so cool that you get to see kind of that comparison where it's like they bring to life this universe that people had only ever been able to play on tabletop or read in books, that wasn't really fairly represented back in the 360 era, even though I'm sure Space Marine 1 was a great game and the games of that era were, but just like this level of hyperrealism that they went for in this game is just so perfect.
If I could make one mention of the model painters, because by God, my TikTok feed is overrun with all things Warhammer, and it includes the model painters. And there are some people who are so incredibly talented when they're painting these models. It's unbelievable, and I think it's really cool that I think when you're starting off, you'll want to paint like really clean models and stuff and make them look as good as possible. But the really, really skilled model painters will like paint those like worn in details on there, because when you have like a basic model and you spray paint them with like the primer coat or whatever, and you paint them, it's like, oh yeah, look, it's a shiny new guy. But a lot of the model painters will go like the extra steps to like paint on the wear and tear onto the armor to make it seem like these guys have kind of been through the ringer. And add that level of realism. And I think that's something that they definitely went to the trouble to capture in the game. So yes, those guys are so talented. I thought about maybe like trying to purchase a couple and be like, oh, like what if I tried painting these? But then I see what people can do, and I'm just like, I don't know if I have the patience for that. Like I don't even know if my hands are like steady enough to be able to do something like that.
As somebody who is not talented in visual arts, I can confirm my attempts have been abysmal at trying to paint my own figures. So I'll just leave it to the professionals on this one.
Yeah.
It's not an ADHD hobby we can fall into.
Yeah, I was like, I'm going to appreciate that from afar. Now you're good because the art for me also is not there. I'm like, I'll appreciate it. Don't have to do it myself. And just talking about the audio too, I'm right there with you as far as the overall music itself, Eric, just because while the music is perfectly fine and I think it's suitable for the game itself, there is no song in the entire game that sounds as good as the roar of a chainsword as it's ripping through a horde of enemies. So I'm like, I can play this thing with the music muted and have a blast.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've played so many games this year where the soundtracks kind of like lend to the storytelling and kind of tell a story all on their own. And I think, Will, that's an interesting point you brought up. You're 100% right that the soundtrack in this case should not take away from the audio elements that they did emphasize, such as, like crushing things with your chainsaw sword or the firing of the guns. Like those are the points of emphasis you really, really want to hammer down if you're making a Warhammer game. Like nobody's going to care if you could have the most beautiful score, soundtrack, the most memorable soundtrack of all time, but if those specific details for the characters, the Space Marines, the world, firing the guns, swinging the sword, killing enemies, if that doesn't sound right, then the soundtrack doesn't matter. So I think the soundtrack being non-intrusive so that you're more focused on the voice acting and the heat of the moment, and and again, the voice acting. I thought the voice acting in this game was
awesome.
Incredible for what he did. The main guy who played Titus was I have his name here, Clive Standen. He's from the hit show Vikings, which I've heard that show is actually pretty incredible. It's on my list to watch.
Same here.
Yeah, I thought all of the voice acting and the voice acting got to me in such a way where I just every time they were speaking, I just wanted to agree with them and be like, yes, I'm with you, brother. Like, let us go. Like it was so it's so incredible. It got me wanting to serve the Emperor. So that was about audio and visual presentation. You guys have anything else you want to add before I want to touch on the story before we close out? Just kind of talk about the story.
No, we get to the story.
Okay, cool. So we're gonna move on to the story. A lot of the notes I have at the top here was stuff we already hammered on. One of the game's best strengths is how welcoming it is to newcomers without sacrificing that deep Warhammer lore. That can't be an easy line to toe when you're writing the game, and it's like, how do we know to like restrain ourselves from explaining every single thing that we want to include in the writing? And like without overwhelming the player, or without like making the game seem like a slog as they stop and constantly explain you things. Because also one thing about the gameplay too is I think, and this ties into story as well, this game's really well paced. I think it's a very brisk campaign. Things are always constantly happening. There's never moments where you're like slogging through stuff and the story kind of comes to a grinding halt. Everything seems like it's constantly moving forward, and there are revelations and things that are always constantly happening while you're fighting through the main gameplay loop of the game. But like I said, and it's made in my notes like an example of like, oh, people will throw around the word like heresy and stuff, and people are heretics, and what does that mean? Well, why are people heretics and stuff? And when you get to the point in the story where the Chaos Marines come into play, you kind of start to learn a little bit about like the forces of chaos and how that can completely control somebody's brain and turn them against their own Ultramarine or their own Space Marine chapter. And you're kind of like, oh, that's what it means to like be a heretic and kind of come into contact with the forces of chaos. And it's just how you kind of naturally learn about things about the world. That is like the main thing I really, really appreciate about this story. And it kind of leaves enough breadcrumbs there for you to want to go watch that 2 or 3 hour video for sure. But we talked a little bit about it. The main plot focuses on Titus, just like it did in the first Space Marine game. I did a little bit of digging on the plot of that game, and Will, if you played that, you can correct me here if I've been wrong about any of these notes. But it seems that in the first game, Titus was accused of heresy by his subordinate when he came into contact with like a chaos artifact in the first game. He was imprisoned by the Inquisition, and the game starts with him serving time in the Death Watch, which is an order of Space Marines made up of Marines from many different chapters dedicated to hunting alien threats across the galaxy. So it feels kind of like almost a little bit like special forces here. Titus's Death Watch.
They're like the chapter that goes on suicide runs because of the dangerous nature, and like they're serving their penance and all that. Yeah.
Yes. And from what I've gathered too about the Death Watch is that people really respect Titus for serving in the Death Watch when it gets to the point. But his squad is killed during the Tyranid invasion of Kadaku, and they're trying to help defend the planet the Mechanicus is trying to help defend the planet and protect something known as Project Aurora, which we get into. And this is where you get into the Titus, who is part of the Ultramarines. He dies essentially, and they restore him back to life by a brutal surgery that makes him a Primus Marine. He gets his new squad in Gadriel, and Chiron returns to the Ultramarines. And this is where we kind of get like an understanding of like what it's like to be part of the Space Marines. They kind of have a chaplain who serves as like almost like a religious advisor and kind of watches out for heresy, and basically explains to Titus that the only way he can regain his honor is to rejoin his old squad in the Ultramarines, his old comrades in the Ultramarines, and kind of fight alongside them to prove that he's no longer under the thumb of chaos. And that's kind of the underlying current of Titus's journey throughout the entire story that we get here. So, what did you guys think about the story and how it kind of ties in the lore and how brisk it is? But despite the fact how brisk it is, I feel satisfied having arrived like at the end of it about everything that I learned about it. So, what did you guys think about the narrative and the story and stuff?
Yeah, the shortness, briskness of it definitely does not take away from the impact that the overall story has on you. For a short story, there are so many, like, I guess for lack of a better term, like PowerPoints I would talk about where, this is the kind of like water cooler talk. You'd be like, oh, do you remember when you were sitting there when the warp opened and you had the flag and you were shooting your pistol off into people?
Dude, so good.
There's just so many hype moments, or it's like, oh, remember that time when you got the jump pack for the first time and you started going up and the game was like, oh, you can hold the R1 and you can do a splash. And of course they happen to put like, a group of Tyranids there for you. So you just do that and splat everybody in slow motion. And I'm just like, oh, this feels so right. They put so many good power moves in there. Definitely a power fantasy. And they don't lean away from that at all. They lean into it hardcore by just saying, hey, we're going to put giant enemies in front of you, even in situations where it looks kind of hopeless on your end. But then you're either like saved at the last minute, or you have something kind of bequeathed to you that allows you to then fight back. The first time you see a dreadnought, come out of like a wall and smash a Hellbrute, something that it took you, maybe the better part of 5 minutes or so to kind of fight straight with you and your two other pals. But then, Dreadnought comes out of here, one-shots the thing, sticks the gun barrel in its mouth and just lets rip a whole bunch of shots. I'm just like, okay, all right, this game is different.
Yeah. I can only agree with Will on this one. I think that like if this campaign went on for any longer, I would have been tired of it. Like if you added like 5 to 10 more hours, I would have been like teetering on the edge of, okay, this has been fun, but I'm kind of like ready for it to go on. So I think that like the runtime that we've gotten here, especially for the story that it was trying to tell and kind of the narrative arc that we get from Titus and Gadriel and Chiron, I think that this is definitely a perfect runtime for the game. In terms of just like the story, I feel like there was so much intrigue in it. Like I wasn't even sure if I could trust like Captain Acheron when he was sitting on 3, I can only give you 3 men, right? Like I wasn't sure. It was so cool because you're coming into this, I'm jumping into this not really having a lot of knowledge of what Titus did in the first game. So like I'm unsure, is he a reliable narrator? We're not 100% sure there. What did he actually do in the Death Watch when we didn't know before he shows up during the Tyranid invasion at first? And then obviously you're presented, like one of the first things you see is Titus having this conversation with the chaplain of the Ultramarines chapter, right? And he's like, listen, you're on thin ice, bud. Like you better get your shit straight, because I'm going to be watching you the entire time. Like you're going to be out there in the field. And then kind of like of course the character dynamics and the power dynamics between Titus and Gadriel, how like Titus assumed the role of his squadron when he was supposed to be Gadriel was supposed to be the one that was going to be promoted in this case, and just kind of some of the feelings and the emotions that come along with that. And then you throw that all in with a sense of like they're on their last leg. Like there's a reason why, Captain Acheron can only spare 3 men. Like apparently there's only supposed to be 1,000 Space Marines per chapter, right? And they are spread so thin because the Tyranid swarm is just, legion, right? They're occupying planets just by and large, like they can't be stopped. And it's so cool kind of seeing the narrative arc that Titus takes, because they start playing it as he's like a real straight guy. And that was something that I was getting a little bit frustrated with him about quarter way through the game, halfway through the game, when I was like, because every time he would be challenged about a decision he would make or something he would do, you know, Gadriel is the first one to say, the Codex Astartes does not support this action. and Titus doesn't give him anything. He's like, that's nice for you to say that. And he continues on and does what he's going to do.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, well, I'm looking for a little bit more, but there's such a very real reason why he doesn't say anything. And like, you understand that you kind of come to figure that out later on. Also, what's the spoiler policy for where we're at? Are we okay with spoilers, or are we waiting until like a wall?
I would say if people are listening to this far and they're curious with the overall plot of Space Marine 2, you should probably stop listening like right now, because I guess we're going to go into spoilers.
We're going to go into some spoilers.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't usually put a spoiler policy up. I just assume that if people are willing to listen past this, if it's something that they like care about, and I guess that's usually why I put story last in the outline, because I'm just like, if you actually care about this, then you should probably stop listening and go play it.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but spoil away.
But yeah, you know, just like kind of getting that sense of at the end of the day when you realize, at the very end, because as I was playing through this game, I was like, this is so fucking cool. I got to figure out what happened in the last game. And I read the wiki article, or like, I guess, the wiki fan page for Space Marine 1, and just knew that it was basically Titus and Leandros and then maybe like one other Space Marine, and they're running through the city and they're trying to get, if I'm not mistaken, it's like the Forge world that was responsible for building like the dreadnoughts and stuff like that, the ultimate war machines that you see in these massive battles between different Primarchs, you know, fighting each other and stuff. And then the orcs are trying to get a hold of that, and so there's this whole power struggle there in the first game. And of course, with the end of the game being where it's like Titus made like the ultimate sacrifice to like take like this Avernus Mechanicus chaos power source, and then Leandros is like, you committed heresy by doing that. And so he's like, well, I guess I did, but I saved everyone. And then coming in here and realizing the entire time the chaplain that was like busting your balls this whole game was just Leandros the whole time, I was like, oh my god, what an incredible reveal. And that would have been lost on me had I not gone back and like looked at it. So it was like, there's some really, really cool stuff in this game, and it's almost like it begs the player to go and look up stuff about the universe, about the lore, about like what it means to be an Ultramarine, what is a Primarch, that sort of thing. It's so cool to me.
Yeah, fuck Leandros.
So 100%.
Yeah.
Exactly. All the homies
The truest
hate
statement
Leandros.
has never been told, brother.
Yeah. Will, did you have anything to add?
Nothing too crazy, except for now that we're doing spoilers and I can go full spoiler. Let's talk about the boy Marnius Calgar, because Jesus Christ.
Goodness.
Hell yeah.
Chapter master of the Ultramarines. This man is putting in work. Not even a Primarch, but still, we're going to go ahead and canonize him, because he had the two big fists with like the guns on the bottom of each barrel. He's just sitting here spraying, just having a blast of a time. Only person to walk through the warp freeze. So good.
I wanted to ask you this, Will, because you like absorb material in facts and information at a much higher rate than I do.
It's what I do.
Like, did you know who Calgar was to make when he popped up, be like, oh shit, like get up on your couch moment? Was that what it was like for you the first time we played?
Not initially, but well, the first time we played, it kind of was, because what happened was classic me. I'm like looking up stuff about Space Marines because I enjoyed it so far. I got a little spoiled. I was like, oh, who's this dude that jumps off of the ship and starts helping out Titus? So then I started doing research, and I was like, Marnius Calgar. I was like, oh, this guy's a badass. So when we actually got to that point in the story and it happened, I was still just like, whoa, let's get it.
Yeah.
Because it preceded, it was preceded by, I should say, the flag scene, which was up to that point, in my opinion, like the hypest scene in the game. You're just doing the last stand, all the different warp portals are opening up, and it feels like, you know, Avengers Endgame, where all the enemies are coming through and you're sitting there with your group of Ultramarines, you're just blasting as many bad guys that come through as possible. You know, the demons aren't taking us down without a fight, and then all hope looks lost. You're about to get swarmed. Here comes Marnius Calgar with the other groups, you know, of Ultramarines popping in, and it's like, oh yeah, we got your call from before. So then you just start blasting, and like,
so cool.
It's fantastic.
And it was interesting too, because I remembered from the very beginning when they said that, because Titus basically dies at the very beginning of this game, when he has that fight with the Carnifex and gets overwhelmed with the Tyranids. And then I remember when he's revived and he's talking to the chaplain, and the chaplain tells him, oh, you've been revived through the Rubicon surgery. It's been approved by Lord Calgar himself, as well as your reinstatement to the Ultramarines. I was like, that's the coolest sentence I've ever heard. I have no idea what it means, but that sounds amazing.
Rad.
Yeah, but then obviously Calgar shows up, and apparently the reason why he wasn't there, why he wasn't in the action, with the ships and everything at the beginning, is because he had to go see the Primarch. Apparently Gilliman had something important that he had to tell him or something like that. So really, really neat, fascinating stuff there. But yeah, that, and then also just like fighting a chaos god. I don't know if it's the name is the Tzich? Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's the Tzich, is the overall god of chaos there.
Yeah, and is that who we fought in this game, or is that one of like the lesser demons that's part of the lore there?
It's one of the lesser demons. Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah, I think it was. Because that boss fight is combined with. So long story short, basically like halfway through the story, when you start fucking around with this chaos artifact, that's when you are introduced to the chaos Space Marines. And if you do a deep dive on the lore, you find out that like there are like 20 Space Marine legions for the 20 Primarchs, and like half of them like turned into Chaos Marine traitors during the Horus Heresy. Go look all this up if you want, because if we elaborate on all this stuff, it's going to be like a 3-hour long podcast. But
right.
You meet one of the Chaos Space Marine legions who also are looking for this artifact that can basically like open portals like anywhere in the galaxy to like where they are, and they can like move their troops around wherever. And that's kind of like where you get that last stand scene, is they've captured this artifact, and Titus picks up the standard and like rallies the Space Marines around like this hill, and all the portals are like opening around them, and it's just like a final last stand before Calgar comes in. And I really like what they did with Calgar, because the way they talk about him, that he is like very, very important.
Yeah.
And and it's established by, again, like how grand and large everything in Warhammer seems to be. So, when he fucking shows up without them even having to tell you that's who it is, you like see a guy like flying in, sitting on the edge of the ship, just like shooting his guns down into the hordes, and he just like hops down. You're like, oh, that's gotta be fucking Calgar. Like who else could that possibly be?
Right.
And so I love when a story does that, like talks about something in like real terms, and then it just like shows up, and you're like, oh, that has to be that guy. So basically the end portion of that story with the Chaos Marines involved is you're trying to get that artifact away from them and like close those warp portals so they can't just like show up wherever they want to, because that would be really, really bad. And at the end of that scene, when you're fighting in like the warper, the interdimensional space with Calgar, and Titus finally turns it off, he grabs like the last like control thing and like turns it off, and everything goes black. One of my favorite details is like, well, it goes black, you hear like a voice in the darkness, and all the voice says, "Rise, son of Gilliman." And that's supposed to be like the Emperor's voice, I guess. And at the time, I didn't realize like how much of a big deal that is, because then you go and you do research on the Emperor, and it's like, oh, the Emperor is like actually just like a mind existing inside of like a skeleton that's strapped to like the throne that makes space travel possible. So, and like he doesn't talk to anybody anymore. So like when Titus fucking hears him speak, like that's a really, really, really big deal, because that like if you might go back to the beginning of so Will mentioned like the Emperor's like 2,000 shaman souls like fused into one, and he's like the guy that has been like leading humanity for like all of these years. He's one of the most powerful beings in this universe, and like he's in a like near death state where they have to like sacrifice so many people to him every day for him to survive.
Yeah, it's like 1,000 humans a day have to be sacrificed to maintain his life force. It's insane. Yeah,
and if he fucking dies, like the throne will go out, and then like they can't navigate space anymore, and then just like chaos demons will just like overtake anything. And he just exists as like a skeleton on the throne, basically. So for him to like speak, like people were fucking freaking out, because they're just like, the Emperor doesn't fucking talk to anybody anymore, really. So just this story is so full of like hype moments. Every single, like I'd say every single mission, there's like some kind of hype moment. Like Will said, the Dreadnought busts out of the wall and just fucking sticks his gun inside the chaos like Dreadnought's face and just blasts it up. And then he like comes with you to help you out. And then when like the dragon flies out, lead me to the slaughter. And when the dragon like flies out of the warp, and he was like, in the name of the Emperor, I cast you down, and like throws like the giant pillar at him and just fucking kills it.
It's incredible.
Like,
because you thought this was going to be a mini boss fight. You thought this was going to be like an end stage boss fight. And he's like, nah, I'm just going to kill that.
I was
quick.
totally ready
Don't
to
worry
fight
about
that thing, and the Dreadnought's just like, nah, man, I got this.
I got this. Yeah, and the whole lore behind the Dreadnoughts is so cool too, because like this idea of there only being a limited number of Space Marines who are descended genetic materials that are from the Emperor himself. Basically, they're descended from the Primarchs, which are like genetic seed markers from the Emperor, and there's a whole bunch of lore stuff that's attached to that too.
a ton.
Like the interesting thing is that like these people, most of the time men, but there are also female Space Marines who are also super badass.
Yep. Fucking deal with it.
Yeah,
Yes.
fucking deal with it, Grums. There's a lot of interesting like moments here where one of the things is that they can't die. They're not really allowed to die. So what will happen is that if a Space Marine in the midst of battle, kind of like similar to what they did with Titus, is too wounded and their body is too far gone in order to repair, what they will do is that they will save, if the brain is intact, which usually the brain is intact because these people are just absolutely just monsters. They're giant beings, right? They will literally take it out of the body in incorporate the skeleton, or rather the spinal column in the brain, and attach it into these giant mechs, basically like a Gundam sized mech, and just be like, you're going to continue to fight, and deploy them into battle. And like the surgery is like horrifically painful for any living Space Marine to go through. It's like the ultimate dedication. And then they live on for
thousands of years.
Of years. Like Titus, they make a point because he has 3 bolts in his 3 or 4 bolts in his skull. Gadriel makes a comment at the beginning of the game that he's at least 2 centuries old. So it's like the amount of, people make these comments all the time about like, a Space Marine versus a Spartan. Like, listen, a Space Marine has been around for centuries. A Spartan at most has been around for like 30, 40 years, right? So it's it's really, really interesting kind of like seeing that and jumping in there, and just all of the just jam-packed cool stuff that you have here. Not to mention like the contact that you have with the guardsmen. Like what are they called? The Cadians? Like how awesome those moments were with them, with like these literal humans that are like worship. They call the Space Marine angels when they show up, because they're so revered within the society. Because when a Space Marine shows up, it's bad news.
Yeah. They treat the Emperor like God, essentially, which is the plot twist. He did not want to be worshipped as a god, but he's a skeleton on a throne now. He can't do anything about it. So yeah, the Space Marines very much are treated like these kind of demigod type of characters because like I said, the Space Marine is not the average human. They are, like I said, there's only 1,000 of them per chapter for like reasons to prevent like uprisings and stuff like that. But the actual number of humans, like number in like the trillions, the billions and billions and trillions of just regular humans. Yeah. And so, and it's not like you would assume based on the way that Game Workshop and all this stuff promote the game that the Space Marines would be like the main force in the universe, but actually they're pretty rare. And when they show up, you're like, oh fuck, things are really really bad. Yeah, things are really really bad if they're here. So yeah, they are very much treated like these demigod type characters. And again, like what Nick said, the lore about the Dreadnought, again, you might think that's horrifying, but again, that's like surface level of fucked up stuff that happens in this universe. So
there's worse.
There's much worse. But yeah, I think we hammered it a couple times here. I think the game just does a fantastic job with the source material it's given. I found myself really, really loving Titus as a character. I really like the dynamic between him, Gadriel, and Chiron. In that Chiron, not so much. Chiron's just kind of like, oh, I just want to like kind of kill stuff and kind of. He has his own kind of mini arc in there where he kind of goes on like a berserk rage when he sees the Chaos Marine heretics, and that's kind of like a mini arc for him. But all these characters kind of go through like an arc of trusting one another, especially Gadriel, who is rightly so very suspicious of Titus and his past and how like secretive Titus is about it. But yet here Titus is during the missions like breaking protocol and searching up like these secret projects and stuff, which only makes Gadriel more suspicious. And Titus will not give him any answers. So I thought that made for like a really, really cool kind of dynamic, which sets at odds the core tenets of what it means to be a Space Marine. And it's that's like your brothers. That's your brotherhood. It's a very, very strong bond between the people who are Space Marines. And here is a squad of, 3 people that are supposed to be bound in brotherhood, fighting for humanity, and they don't trust each other. So I thought that was a really great dynamic that played out over the course of the game. And again, very well paced for like all the story moments, all the reveals, like when Gadriel challenges Titus and constantly pushes him for answers. And eventually Titus sees the light and is like, I have to be truthful about what I went through, because me keeping secrets is exactly what happened to me like last time, and it kind of fucked me over. So there's some really good growth in there over the brisk pace of the campaign.
Yeah,
sure
and
is.
even the moment where it came to a head, when they were in contact with the individual. I don't know if they were part of the Adeptus Mechanicus, but it was the kind of the only sorcerers that were approved by the Emperor to use magic, because it was for logistical purposes, to transmit messages and go from back and forth. And it was the moment where Titus kind of like demands that she transmit the message to get the word out of what they had been working on at that point. And then Gadriel pulls gun on him, like how severe and how serious that was at that point. And even and how quickly he came back around. And once, exactly, Titus, as you said, Titus realizes that he needs to be honest and forthright about, his history and what happened to him in the past too.
Just like classic brothers, you get a gun pulled on you, you struggle over it, and then 2 minutes later you're like, oh, it's all right, I love you, no problem.
We fought
like,
about it, let's
we're
have
brothers.
a couple beers.
Right, exactly.
like that line that everyone loves, myself included, the whole like, they're about to go dive into the last mission, which, by the way, slight gripe, but not really, because it's so hype. But that last mission really being 3 missions was a hell of a thing for them to do. I'm like, oh sweet, look, it's just another mission in the game. Here we go. And then I finish it. I'm like, all right, cool, I can pause. Oh no, it's automatically booting up another mission. I guess I'll do this one. All right, cool. Let me go ahead and pause that. Oh no.
Did we finish that at like 1:30 in the morning?
Yes,
at night when we were playing
did
together.
And when you and I were playing together, it glitched out on me, so I had to do it again the next day. So
What?
Yeah, that was fun. That was a good time. But all that to say, the whole we're about to dive onto this planet and go through some rubble and do some craziness before we start fighting all the Chaos Marines. And Gadriel's like, the Codex Astartes does not support this action, but I am looking forward to it. And I was like, here we go.
So you're like, all right, Gadriel's back to being a bro now. It's all
he's
good.
the homie.
Chadriel himself. Yep.
Chadriel.
Chadriel. That's good. That's good. Okay, yeah, I think we've covered the story in enough, at least enough detail for, I think if you play, there's still some things for you to discover there. But before we kind of give you guys the floor to kind of show your stuff, do you have any final conclusions, final thoughts about Space Marine 2? And Will, I'll toss back over to you. Do you have any kind of thoughts to tell the people?
Mm-hmm. I'll say at the end of the day, we've talked about it, at length. We're looking at close to 2 hours here. But the big thing is, this is the kind of game that, one, I think needs to be celebrated in, especially the current kind of like mindset and climate that we have for video games. People will, look at certain games and say, this failed because of this failed because of that, or they have their own ideas as far as why something had issues or this. This is a game that, even if you're not into like the gore, bloody violence, you look at it from a technical standpoint and it's fantastic. You look at it as a whole package standpoint, it gives you single player, PvE, and PvP, all with no microtransactions. Even to, someone's chagrin over there, you can't spend your own money to buy things. You have to play the game to buy.
Damn it.
I love that. That was one of the first things
they?
Nick was like,
how dare they do that to me?
I want to spend money and get my colors. Why do I got to play? I'm like, nope. The game says, hey, we're taking it back to the 360
He whispered
days.
it to me over the comms. You gotta play, big dog. You just gotta play.
Right. It's like getting the Hayabusa armor in Halo 3 or whatever it was. Like, you gotta play.
You got to do it. You got to play you can't just swipe the card and get it. This is not Fortnite. But the big thing is, it's a fully fleshed out product. It's a thing that has predetermined lore that they really cater to and love. If you're new to the franchise, this has a very high chance of making you a fan of Warhammer. If you love Warhammer, then this should be something that's really just like a kiss to everything that you've enjoyed over the last couple of years or months, depending on how long you've enjoyed it. So, I'm up there with some of those higher scores that we talked about at the top of the podcast, where it's just, I can't look at this game and say, oh man, there's major issues to the point where you shouldn't play this. I could recommend this to anyone unless you're extremely squeamish.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I can only echo everything that Will has said here. I think, you know, again, to circle back on what we've already discussed, is that this game is not overly long, but it is so well focused on all of the things that it does right in this game. And I think that's such an important thing to take away, because, you know, you look at a game like Star Wars Outlaws and it's, or what any Assassin's Creed of yore, and, you know, looking even outside of Ubisoft, all of the dozens of games, even Sony first party titles that have released in a less than desirable state at launch, because they're, you know, they feel like they have to commit to these, you know, 50, 60, 70 hour open world expansive games with all of these, you know, multi-dimensional systems stacked on top of each other. That is not what Space Marine 2 is. Space Marine 2 is a very, you know, simple, focused game that's going to not take up too much of your time, but really honor the source material that it comes from and get you in. So if you're a person out there that's kind of like on the fence, you're listening to this podcast and you're wondering, hey, is Space Marine 2 is for me? If you haven't figured it out by now, then that might be a little bit of a you problem. But Space Marine 2, I think, is 100% recommend. I don't understand the 6 out of 10s, the 60 out of 100s for the review scale out there. I think this is a quintessential 8 out of 10 game. It's not gonna move the needle in terms of the genre that it occupies, but it does everything really, really well, and it understands the lane that it exists in, and it stays there consistently throughout the experience. So, you know, come in for it for the fun, come in it to play with your friends, and have a really great time slaying Xenos and heretics together. And I think that's where you gotta look at it.
Yeah, that covers my thoughts pretty well. I would say that this game has definitely made me a fan of Warhammer in general. I don't think I'd ever get to the point where I would like buy the models and paint them and play the tabletop game. I don't think that's for me, but I think there are ways that I can engage with Warhammer, such as reading the books, or maybe now even going back and finding a way to play Space Marine 1 or playing some of the other Warhammer games that have come out. It has introduced me to a side, something that I didn't know was so expansive and so deep and so loved by so many people, and really discovering like this brand new community of this thing that I did not expect to discover this year. So yeah, I was really, really surprised, and I think you guys both nailed it. In an era where gaming seems to be largely defined by the size of a game, the scope of a game, how cutting edge it is, how realistic the graphics look, how much money they spent to build the game, you know, the AAA or the, even if we're getting into like the quadruple A term people are starting to throw around, how the scale of those games. I think Space Marine 2 proves that you don't need all of those things to be a successful game. And I think we're reaching a point now where the industry is starting to realize that model is unsustainable for you to spend $300 million on a game of that size and scale and have to sell X number of games, otherwise it's a catastrophic failure. It is, I just think, unsustainable. And I think Space Marine 2 is, I mean, it honestly feels like a game from the like 2 generations ago. It feels like a game I would play in the 2010s. And I know that, you know, some people would knock that, and gaming now is so defined by these gigantic blockbuster titles that people say are so quality when you talk about the PlayStation titles. But Space Marine 2, to me, represents what it means at its core to play video games, and that's just to have a really, really fun experience that gives you something that's immersive and gives you something that's a power fantasy and gives you something that's just plain fun to play. And I think you guys both said it. They knew what they wanted to accomplish when they set out to make this. They had a very, very clear goal. They had a very, very clear vision of what they wanted to do. They worked really closely with the maker of the tabletop game to make sure that it was as lore accurate as possible for fans, and still managed to find a way to make it welcoming to newcomers as well. And it had this kind of amazing viral moment that I think, I don't know if we have any sales numbers on it yet, but I feel like this game was pretty successful because they've already been talking about like roadmaps and stuff they want to add to the game, and bringing in like more armor and more Marine chapters and more missions and stuff for you to do. So yeah, I think, you know, if you have any curiosity at all and you just want something that's kind of a break from all of the major games that we've gotten over the last couple of years. Not that Space Marine 2 is not a major game in its own right, but in the traditional way that games have been developed for the last couple of years, I think Space Marine 2 it's amazing, and it's definitely one of my favorite games that I've played this year. It was a surprise because I've played some really, really big, hefty games this year, and Space Marine 2, I was kind of in a little bit of a rut for games the last couple months about really committing myself to playing stuff, and Space Marine 2 was kind of just like that palate cleanse I needed, and was a really, really great way to kind of like reinvigorate me towards playing stuff again. So yeah, I think if you listen to this episode, we all three of us would highly recommend this. We can't sing this game's praises enough, and yeah, we might start that Lorehammer podcast and just talk about all the crazy effed up stuff. Like just warning, if you do go and search the lore of Warhammer, please be expected to hear some really, really like. It's not called grimdark for a reason. Like it's grim and it's dark.
It's messed up.
Yeah, it's really messed up. So yeah, gentlemen, I think that just about does it. I hear my baby crying upstairs, so I think that's the universal sign.
Timing.
Yeah, it's the universal sign.
Podcast.
So thank you guys so much for joining me again. It's always such a blast to podcast with you guys, to work with some of my absolute favorite people on the internet, such consummate professionals. So I'll give you this time. Tell people where they can find you on the internet, and shill all the good stuff you got going on over at Friday Night Gamecast.
Thanks so much, Eric. Yeah, we are the Friday Night Gamecast. Nick and Will were the core co-hosts. Variety Games podcast. We focus on reviews, but we also throw in variety topics that we get to jump on, and we love collaborating with our podcast community. So if you're a podcaster out there, you haven't worked with us, or you want to have us on our show, please reach out to us. You can find us on Twitter, the website formerly known as Twitter, at FNGC Pod. And if you just want to listen to our content, we are on all podcasting platforms. It's just the Friday Night Gamecast. And, recently I just posted Will's Rune Factory 4 review, which was an incredible review. So much fun.
Incredible.
Lots of laughs to be had there. So go check that out. Our most recent kind of pinnacle reviews, and we're really kind of killing it right now. We got a killer lineup to head on throughout the end of this year. But I just did Final Fantasy VII Rebirth with Colby Moyer from the Switch It Up podcast. Another
got
friend
him out of
of the
retirement.
Unlockables.
Wow.
I got him out of retirement. I got him down.
Only the best.
I nailed it down. It was a tough task, but it was so much fun doing that. And then, of course, we were joined by Jacob McCord, as previously stated, for the Astrobot review. And those are both available to listen to now, and some more to come later on. So definitely just go check those out.
Okay, cool. And that's just Friday Night Gamecast across all socials and stuff like that?
That's right, yeah. It's Friday Night Gamecast on Instagram, and then at FNGC Pod on Twitter. Yeah, so you can find us on there. Just do a quick Google search and we'll pop up.
Cool. Anything you like to add, Will?
Really, that's it. Make sure you hit our socials. Please interact with us. We love chatting back and forth on Twitter, Instagram. I try to post up some decent reels here and there. So if you want to pop and make us famous, go ahead and hit a like there and get some watches in. Just set your phone down and let it repeat the reel over and over and over again until we hit that algorithm, right? That's what we're looking for.
Exactly.
That sweet algo juice.
Yeah. Definitely do that. FNGC is a show that's definitely worth supporting. Nick and Will do an incredible job. I've been on there a couple of times. Every time I go on there, it's just an absolute blast. And again, thank you guys so much for giving me some of your time tonight to talk about an amazing game and just to catch up a little bit. So as far as myself, hi, I'm Eric. This is the Unlockables. You found the show. If this is your first episode, what a fantastic first episode for you to jump into here. But if you want to see what else is going on for the podcast, you can find everything you need to find under linktr.ee/Unlockables podcast. My Twitter account is there. The podcast Twitter account is there, as well as the podcast Instagram. You can join the Discord server, which I will admit is a little more dead than other people's Discord servers, but if you want to just keep up with what is going on in the Unlockables, that's a great place to do it. And then we recently brought back, I talk about like there's other people on the show, it's just me. I recently brought back the Unlockables Patreon, so if you want to go and support the show, you can for $3 an hour. $3 an hour, holy shit. I'm charging you guys for, oh my goodness.
High quality
$3 a month. My goodness, I could quit my job. $3 a month. You can support the show and you can get some extra goodies there. You can vote on the community game of the month. And I'm trying to do like some vlog stuff. I'm not doing a good job of getting those out, but I will have some extra content that'll probably be audio/video based, just around like whatever I would like to do that I don't think really fits in with the Unlockables, or maybe some shorter stuff there. So go and check that out. I think it's just patreon.com/Unlockables or Unlockables Podcast. One of those two. You'll find it. I don't know. I'm bad at promoting things. But Nick, Will, thank you guys so much again. This was an absolute blast. And I can't wait to have you guys back on again.
Yep.
Thank you so
Always a
much,
good time,
Eric.
so thank you.
Yeah, fantastic time. Thanks.
Thank you guys. And instead of the usual outro that I'll leave you with, I guess all I can say to end this podcast is for the Emperor, all you guys have a good night.
For the Emperor!
Glory and honor.